The voice wasn't hers. It was something else, wearing her terror like a grotesque, ill-fitting suit. "What are you?" it snarled, a low, wet gurgle that felt less like sound and more like a vibration tearing through the bone behind my ear. My hand, already slick with cold sweat, tightened on the receiver, knuckles white and aching. A dead silence followed, so profound it was a physical weight, pressing in, stealing the oxygen from the tiny, stale air of the security booth. It was the kind of silence that screams of an ending, a final, horrifying punctuation mark on a story that should never have begun. My breath hitched, caught somewhere between my throat and my pounding chest. The world outside, the vast and inky blackness of the Port Monroe docks, seemed to hold its breath with me. But the real horror, the relentless, insidious kind that burrows deep, didn't truly begin in that moment. That was just the crescendo. No, the fuse had been lit hours before, like every other damn fuse in my cursed existence, with the simple, jarring ring of an old phone on a night that was supposed to be just another shift in a long, unremarkable string of shifts. Another temporary stop on the endless, exhausting flight from a past that refused to stay buried. It was 11:43 p.m., and the world outside the Port Monroe Authority building was a vast, indifferent canvas of rain-streaked asphalt and the skeletal forms of cranes against a bruised, moonless sky. My current gig, night watchman, or more accurately, glorified alarm babysitter for a port that rarely saw anything more exciting than a rusty container ship, was exactly the kind of dead-end, low-contact job I gravitated towards. It paid the bills, barely, and kept me anonymous, which was the real currency I traded in these days. My office was less an office and more a glorified broom closet, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the main building. A single grimy window looked out onto the empty loading docks, the air thick with the metallic tang of salt and diesel, a permanent chill clinging to everything. The kind of place where the silence wasn't peaceful, but watchful, like the building itself was holding its breath. I ran a hand over the worn leather of my jacket, the familiar scritch of the material a small, anchoring comfort. It was the only constant in a life that felt like a perpetually shifting landscape of transient jobs and cheap motels. I'd been tracing the hairline crack on the ancient, laminate desk with a fingernail, lost in the monotonous hum of the ancient server rack in the corner. When the phone shrieked, it wasn't the main line, the one that rang maybe twice a week for a delivery inquiry. This was the old, dedicated emergency line, a direct connection to, well, to nowhere as far as I knew. It hadn't rung once in the 3 months I'd been here. My gut clenched instantly. Normalcy was a dangerous illusion, and a ringing phone in a forgotten corner of the world at this hour was anything but. Every instinct honed by years of running, of stumbling into the wrong place at the wrong time, screamed at me to let it ring, to ignore it, walk away, let the silence claim it. But then that damned, persistent ache in my chest, that reluctant conscience began to gnaw. It was the same stupid impulse that had pulled me into the orbit of people like Ethan or Olivia, or, God help me, had made me listen too long to the things that crawled in the walls. It was my fatal flaw, the one thing I couldn't seem to excise, no matter how much horror it led me to. I picked up the receiver, the plastic warm and greasy beneath my fingers. "Port Authority," I said, my voice rougher than I intended, a question rather than a statement. The line hissed back, a static-laced breath that felt colder than the November air outside. For a long, unnerving moment, that was all there was, the white noise, like the ocean roaring through a broken shell. My fingers instinctively went to my old analog wristwatch, fiddling with the crown, the tick-tick-tick, a tiny rhythmic anchor against the rising tide of unease. It wasn't about the time, never was, just a small, mechanical certainty in a world that consistently pulled the rug out from under my feet. Then, a whisper, faint, tremulous, barely cutting through the distortion. "Someone's in my house," a child's voice. My stomach dropped like a stone. This wasn't a prank. The fear in that whisper was too raw, too pure. It dragged me back instantly to the memory of other screams, other pleas, the kind that burrowed into your brain and laid eggs there, hatching nightmares. It was the sound of true, unadulterated terror, the kind that resonated with every fractured piece of my own past. The phantom chill of a sycamore tree's shadow, the scent of burning wood, and something far worse, something utterly wrong, flashed through my mind, a fleeting, unwelcome guest. "Hello? Can you hear me?" I forced my voice to a calm, steady tone, the one I used to use when dealing with agitated truckers, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "What's your name?" "Kid." A pause filled with the crackle and pop of the line. "Amber," she whispered. The name was so fragile, so small, it felt like it might shatter. "Amber," I repeated, trying to project reassurance, trying to ignore the knot of dread tightening in my chest. "Can you tell me where you are? What's happening?" Her address came next, hesitant, punctuated by tiny, hitching breaths. A residential street a few miles inland, a quiet suburban neighborhood that looked innocent enough during the day. "My mom's at work," she whimpered, "and my sister's camping. I'm all alone." Alone. The word echoed, twisting the knife already plunged deep. An 8-year-old, alone, with someone in her house. Every cell in my body screamed at me to hang up, to pretend it never happened, to call 911 myself and report a prank call. But the image of her, small and terrified, alone in the dark, was already forming behind my eyes. It wasn't heroism, it was that damn stubborn spark of decency, that self-destructive need to confront the darkness instead of letting it consume someone else. A punishment, perhaps, for all the times I hadn't been able to help, for all the things I'd run from. "Okay, Amber, listen to me," I said, leaning forward, my voice low and urgent. "Are you in your room? Can you lock yourself in?" "I'm already under my bed," she whispered, the words muffled as if she was speaking into a blanket. Under the bed, a child's fortress. But my mind, already hypervigilant, saw the flaws in that defense, the shadows that coiled there, the exposed angles. Safety was an illusion. I knew that. It was just a matter of time before the real world, the world of teeth and darkness, broke through. "Good, stay quiet. Very quiet. Do you have anything with you?" I asked. A ridiculous question, but I was grasping at straws, desperate to give her some small sense of agency. A faint rustling, then a muffled thud. "My rabbit, a pink one. Dad said it keeps me safe." My throat tightened. A pink rabbit. God. He was right, I said, the lie tasting like ash. What kind of monster would a rabbit protect you from? But even as the thought formed, another, colder one surfaced. There were things in this world that no rabbit, no lock, no parent could protect you from. Things I'd learned about in the worst possible ways. Then it came, a sound that tore through the static, through the flimsy fabric of the quiet night, and lodged itself directly in my brain. A grinding, wet laughter, not human, never human. It was like metal scraping on bone, like something tearing through sodden flesh. My breath caught in my throat, a cold, clammy sweat breaking out on my forehead. My entire body locked up, a primal, ancient fear coiling in my gut. Amber's tiny sobs, which had been a quiet undertone, now exploded into frantic, desperate gasps. "It's outside my door," she whimpered, her voice cracking, breaking into incoherent pleas. My hands were shaking violently now, clutching the edge of the desk so hard I thought I might splinter the cheap laminate. "Stay quiet, Amber," I croaked, trying to steady my voice. "The police are... they're almost there." The lie felt hollow, a pathetic shield against the terror screaming in my own ears. I didn't even know if I could get 911 to believe me. They'd think I was having a breakdown, just another transient losing his grip. Then came the crash, a violent, splintering sound, like a door being ripped from its frame, followed by Amber's raw, ear-splitting shriek. "What are you?" she screamed, her voice already hoarse with terror. The silence that followed was instant, absolute, a dead, suffocating blanket that pressed down on me, squeezing the air from my lungs. I waited, heart pounding, for Amber's voice, for any sound. But the only reply was a new sound, one that scraped against every nerve ending and clawed its way into the deepest, darkest corners of my mind. The voice that answered wasn't hers. It was hers, yes, but twisted, stretched, and distorted beyond recognition. A mocking echo chamber of her own terror. It was like listening to a broken record, the words mangled into something monstrous. "What are you?" it snarled again, low and wet, a chilling mimicry that implied a predatory understanding, an obscene delight in her fear. Then, silence. Utter, complete, and terrifying silence. The phone line was dead. I dropped the receiver as if it were a live coal. It clattered against the desk, the plastic still humming faintly with the echo of that voice. My hands trembled so violently I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from falling. My mind raced, trying to process, to rationalize. But there was no rationalizing that sound. That voice, it wasn't human. It wasn't a home invasion. It was something else. Something hungry. I scrambled for my phone, fingers fumbling over the worn buttons, dialing 911. "This is Leo Vance," I stammered, my voice barely recognizable. "I just got a call on the Port Authority emergency line. A child. Amber. She said someone was in her house. An intruder. The address is..." The dispatcher on the other end cut me off, her voice flat, practiced. "Sir, are you reporting a prank call? This isn't a 911 line. If you have an emergency, please use your primary phone." "It wasn't a prank," I roared, the fear twisting into a desperate anger. "There was a child. I heard a sound. She screamed." She was terrified. "Sir, calm down," she said, her tone irritatingly placating. "We have no active calls from that address. Are you sure you weren't dreaming? Or perhaps had a faulty line?" They didn't believe me. Of course, they didn't. They never do. It was the same old song and dance, the same dismissive skepticism I'd encountered after every single impossible horror I'd stumbled into. The world preferred its monsters in movies, its nightmares confined to the dark edges of sleep. I slammed the phone down. There was no point. No one was coming. No one could come. Whatever had been in Amber's house wasn't something patrol cars and flashlights could handle. I knew that with a bone-deep certainty, a knowledge forged in other dark places, in encounters with things that defied all logic and reason, things that lurked in walls or behind pretty faces, or in the very air itself. I paced the small booth, a caged animal, the smell of dust and fear thick in the air. The address Amber had given me burned in my mind. I knew I should stay put, knew I should just ride out the shift, collect my meager pay, and vanish by morning. But that damn conscience, a splinter under my skin that never truly healed, wouldn't let me. I had to know, even if it was just to confirm the horror, to prove I hadn't lost my mind completely. The drive was a blur, the old pickup rattling over the damp asphalt, the rain a constant, drumming presence on the windshield. The street Amber had named was quiet, residential, lined with neat, unassuming houses. Her house stood out, not because of anything obvious, but because of the oppressive silence emanating from it. No lights on, no sound, just an unnatural stillness. I killed the engine, the sudden quiet of the truck deafening. The air outside felt heavy, humid, even in the cool night, a metallic tang, like old blood and ozone. pricked at my nostrils. My mag light felt heavy and cold in my hand as I stepped out, my boots crunching on the wet gravel driveway. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to drive until the gas tank was empty. But I pressed on, drawn by an invisible thread of dread. This felt different, more personal somehow than the random horrors I usually encountered. This felt like a beacon, drawing me in, as if I were intrinsically linked to the suffering. The front door was ajar, splintered wood clinging precariously to the jamb. A dark stain bloomed on the carpet just inside, a viscous, sickly sweet scent hanging in the air, reminiscent of decay and something else, something chemical, like formaldehyde mixed with scorched sugar. The faint scent of charred wood lingered too. Though there was no sign of fire, it was the specific smell of a place where violence had erupted, a horror so profound it had left an olfactory scar. My stomach churned. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting a shaky swathe through the inky blackness. The living room was untouched, but as I moved further, a sense of mounting dread choked me. The hallway was narrower than it should have been, the air colder, denser. The temperature plummeted with each step, the cold seeping into my bones, a familiar chill that always heralded the truly awful things. It was the same kind of bone-deep cold that had permeated that abandoned house where the walls whispered, or that desolate stretch of highway where the hitchhiker had waited. Amber's room was at the end of the hall. The door hung off its hinges, a gaping, ragged maw in the wall. My flashlight beam danced across the interior, revealing a scene of utter, senseless destruction. Claw marks, impossibly deep, gouged into the plaster walls, trailing across the ceiling like a spider's web of violence. Splinters of wood were scattered like confetti, shards of a shattered existence. The bed was overturned, its sheets ripped to shreds, stained with a dark, glistening crimson that could only be blood. It was a massacre, a silent, terrible testament to something that defied the laws of physics and biology. And in the center of the carnage, a small, pink form, it was the rabbit, Amber's pink rabbit. It lay there, soaked through with the same dark, wet crimson, its once soft, plush fur matted and stiff, grotesque. Its plastic eyes, fixed in a vacant stare, seemed to hold all the horror of that moment. I stared at it, frozen, bile rising in my throat. No sign of Amber, only this unspeakable, visceral evidence of something that had taken her. My breath hitched. This was worse than I could have imagined. This was a nightmare made real, a physical manifestation of the grinding, wet laughter I'd heard through the phone. I backed out slowly, carefully, my eyes never leaving the rabbit. The sheer wrongness of the scene, the palpable malevolence in the air, settled over me like a shroud. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just had to get out. I stumbled back to my truck, my limbs heavy, uncooperative. The moment I started the engine, the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, intensified. I knew with grim certainty that this wasn't over, that whatever had happened in that house, whatever had taken Amber, had somehow marked me too. My reluctant conscience, my stupid need to listen, had dragged me deeper into the abyss. Again. I quit the Port Authority that night, didn't even bother collecting my last paycheck, just drove and drove. The only thought in my mind was distance, miles, states, anything to put space between me and that house, that call, that damned impossible laugh. But you don't outrun these things, not when you're me. The first time it appeared, weeks later, I was holed up in a Fleabag motel outside Boise, working a graveyard shift at a distribution center. I'd walked into my room, flicked on the single, dim lamp, and there it was, on the faded, patterned carpet, right in the middle of the room, the pink rabbit, soaked in crimson, its fur matted and stiff, just as I'd seen it in the shattered bedroom. My heart seized in my chest, I backed away slowly, my breath catching. It wasn't possible. I'd seen it at the house, hours from here. I hadn't touched it. It was impossible. But there it was, an undeniable, gruesome testament. I threw up in the sink, the meager contents of my stomach burning my throat. I wrapped it in a plastic bag, walked to the nearest dumpster, and dropped it in, trying to tell myself it was a hallucination, a trick of a mind unraveling under the accumulated weight of too many horrors. The guilt gnawed at me. "You didn't save me." Her whisper, faint and accusing, seemed to echo in the damp night air. It wasn't guilt. The rabbit reappeared, on the passenger seat of my truck, nestled among my go bag. On the doorstep of a rented room in Montana, on the dusty dashboard, its vacant eyes staring at me as I drove. Each time, its appearance was accompanied by subtle shifts in the air, sudden, inexplicable cold spots that raised goosebumps on my arms even in summer. And the whispers, always the whispers. Amber's voice, faint and trembling, pleading. Then, the laughter, that grinding, wet sound, like metal tearing flesh, distorting her innocent voice into something vile and mocking. I tried to tell myself it was my mind, finally breaking. Years of seeing things others didn't, of surviving what should have killed me, of running from a past that refused to be forgotten. Sycamore Grove, that damn farm, the things in the walls. It was all catching up to me, but the rabbit was real. It was tangible. And it always smelled faintly of decay and something sickly sweet. I moved again, to California, then Arizona, always west, always south, chasing the sun, hoping to outrun the shadows. But the rabbit was a tireless hunter. It would be waiting for me, a silent, crimson-stained sentinel, wherever I stopped, and the laughter, that guttural, wet sound, would begin, soft at first, almost playful, then growing, swelling, until it filled the empty spaces of whatever temporary lodging I found myself in. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake to a soft, insistent tapping on the window, and then her whisper, clear as a bell, cutting through the thin veil of sleep. "Why didn't you save me?" It's not a question, it's an accusation, a promise. Whatever is haunting me, whatever took Amber, isn't finished. It's patient, calculating. It waits, and I know, with the cold certainty of a man who's seen too much, that it will come for me eventually. It's just a matter of time before the tapping turns into the splintering crash, before the whisper becomes the snarl. My only hope is that when it finally takes me, it's quick, and that it doesn't follow me wherever it is I'm supposed to go next. Because if the universe is just another farm, and death no escape, then even that hope is a cruel joke. Total character count, 9,148. The guttural shriek tore through the thin canvas of the tent, followed by a wet, sickening thud. My blood ran cold, a familiar, unwelcome chill that bypassed the layers of flannel and denim and settled deep in my bones. Buster, my scruffy German Shepherd mix, let out a terrified whimper, pressing himself against my side, his body a rigid line of muscle and fear. Another scream, this one cut short, strangled, choked off by something massive and unspeakably hungry. Then, the heavy, squelching sound of something being dragged through the damp earth, fading into the oppressive silence of the howling woods. I tasted copper, the metallic tang of pure adrenaline, and knew with a grim certainty that whatever had just happened to my neighbors was about to happen to me. My fingers, slick with sweat, instinctively went to the cold steel of the old analog wristwatch on my left wrist, as if its unmoving hands could somehow halt the relentless march of horror. The whole damn thing had started, as it always did, with a wrong turn, a false promise of quiet. I'd been running on fumes, both literal and metaphorical, after a grueling stretch driving a refrigerated truck across the Dakotas. The hum of the engine, the endless ribbon of highway, It was a kind of white noise, a numbing drone that kept the real noise, the screaming memories, at bay. But even I needed to pull over sometimes. Even I needed a few hours where the only thing demanding my attention was the chirping of crickets or the distant call of an owl. That's what I'd told myself when I pulled off the interstate near Bozeman, aiming for some anonymous patch of dirt, a place where a man and his dog could just exist. My worn leather jacket felt heavier than usual, a familiar comfort and a constant burden. It had seen more miles, more grim sights than most people saw in a lifetime. I'd planned to hit a campground near Earthquake Lake, had even booked it online. A rare moment of optimism, maybe a week. I'd thought, just me and Buster, a little fishing, a lot of nothing. Simple, peaceful. The universe, in its infinite sadistic wisdom, seemed to find these fleeting moments of hope hilarious. "Double booked, sir," the elderly camp host at Earthquake Lake had said, her voice dripping with an apology that felt, to my cynical ears, like a practiced lie. I'd seen too many polite faces hide ugly truths. "Computer glitch, but we can send you to Howling Woods, just 10 minutes up the road. Rustic, but available." Rustic. Right, my gut. A loyal companion honed by years of avoiding trouble that always seemed to find me anyway. Immediately clenched. Rustic usually meant forgotten, and forgotten often meant best left that way. But the exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing down on my eyelids, blurring my vision. Buster, sensing my agitation, nudged my hand with his wet nose, a silent plea for stability. "Fine," I'd grunted, taking the hastily scrawled directions and the refund. No options, no choice. That was the story of my life. The drive to Howling Woods was exactly 10 minutes, as promised, but it felt like a descent into something else entirely. The asphalt quickly gave way to a dirt track, rutted and overgrown, flanked by towering lodgepole pines so dense they seemed to blot out the afternoon sun. A perpetual twilight clung to the air, thick and cloying, smelling of pine needles, damp earth, and something else, something vaguely metallic, like old blood or ozone just before a storm. A faint mist, too thick for the season, swirled between the trunks, clinging to the branches like ghostly tinsel. This wasn't rustic, it was ancient. It felt like the forest itself was exhaling, a slow, heavy breath that tasted of forgotten horrors. This wasn't just a place, it was a maw, open and waiting. My hand instinctively went to my wristwatch, not to check the time, but as a grounding tick, a small, tangible anchor in a world that increasingly refused to make sense. The campground itself consisted of a few sparsely spread out clearings, each with a rusted fire pit and a decaying picnic table. No other campers were in sight, which should have been a red flag the size of Montana, but my fatigue had dulled my instincts to a dangerous degree. The host's RV, a faded, moss-covered relic, sat perched near the entrance like a spider in its web. I approached, Buster trotting warily at my heels, his usual boundless energy replaced by a cautious silence. His ears, usually perked, were slightly lowered, twitching, scanning, picking up on frequencies I couldn't. I envied his honest fear. Mine was a dull, resigned ache. I knocked. The door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman, her face a roadmap of deep, weathered lines, her eyes dark, sunken pools that seemed to reflect the dim light with an unsettling inner glow. She offered a toothless smile that didn't reach her eyes, and a faint, smoky, almost animalistic scent clung to her, a scent that prickled the hairs on my arms. Her voice, when she spoke, carried a strange, gravelly cadence, almost a croon, like wind through dry reeds. "Welcome to Howling Wood," she rasped, her eyes locking onto mine. A gaze that felt less like looking at me and more like looking through me, peeling back layers, dissecting my very soul. It dragged me back to that impossible farm, to the eyes of those things that harvested souls, the same vacant, all-knowing emptiness. You're the late arrival. Ethan, isn't it? My real name, Leo Vance, never left my lips. Leo, I corrected, a lie born of habit and necessity. And this is Buster. I gestured to the dog, who was now subtly pressing against my leg, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Leo, she repeated, the name sounding foreign and heavy on her tongue. Her hand shot out, bony fingers surprisingly strong, clamping onto my wrist, right over my watch. Her grip was cold, like river stone. You follow the rules. Leo, these rules are not suggestions. She thrust a crumpled, yellowed piece of paper into my hand. The cursive script was uneven, almost frantic, as if written by a shaking hand in a terrible hurry. It smelled of smoke, old paper, and something metallic. Each line felt less like a guideline and more like a binding incantation. Extinguish all fires at dusk. Do not leave your tent after dark. Avoid using light sources if you must step outside. Ignore any noises. Never discuss what you see or hear. Break them, she hissed, her voice dropping to a guttural growl that vibrated in my chest, a low thrumming that echoed some primal fear. Her eyes, those dark, bottomless pits, seemed to glow brighter, reflecting the encroaching shadows. And you may not live to regret it. Her words carried a finality that made the air around us crackle. This wasn't a warning, it was a sentence. It reminded me of the whispered truths of the man in the walls, truths that unraveled reality, or the chilling logic of Olivia, who saw people as merely raw materials. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. I managed a curt nod, the exhaustion warring with a sudden, potent surge of dread. My fingers were still wrapped around the watch, the cold metal a small comfort. It was a nervous tick, a way to anchor myself to something real, measurable, when everything else slid into the surreal. Buster let out another low growl, a rumble that deepened as the woman's eyes lingered on him for a moment, a glint of something I couldn't quite decipher in their depths, a flicker of possessiveness or just hunger. I didn't want to know. I retreated, practically dragging Buster to the campsite she'd pointed out. As I set about pitching the tent, the air grew heavier, the silence more profound. It wasn't just a lack of sound, it was an active absence, a vacuum that pressed in on my eardrums. The trees leaned closer, their branches swaying in a breeze that didn't exist. Buster, usually chasing squirrels or sniffing every new scent, kept to my heels, his head low, his tail tucked, casting nervous glances into the dense, silent forest. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. I worked quickly, my hands moving with practiced efficiency, but my mind was a churning eddy of dread. The rules: extinguish fires at dusk, don't leave the tent, no lights, ignore noises, never discuss. Each one hammered home a single, terrifying truth. Whatever was out here, it didn't like fire, it didn't like light, and it didn't want to be acknowledged. This wasn't some campfire ghost story. This felt like a pact, a concession. It felt like living under the gaze of something ancient, something that tolerated human presence only on its own monstrous terms. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a lurid smear of orange and purple that felt more like a bruise than a sunset, I was already inside the tent, every zipper secured, every flap tied down. I double-checked the padlock the host had insisted on selling me, a heavy, clunky thing that felt useless against whatever had carved those rules into her weathered face. Buster was curled up tight against my sleeping bag, his body trembling faintly. I tried to tell myself it was just the cold, but the temperature inside the tent was surprisingly mild. This was pure, unadulterated fear. The first night, the silence was worse than any noise. It was a living thing, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on me, amplifying every creak of the tent fabric, every thump of my own frantic heartbeat. I found myself holding my breath, straining to hear something, anything, beyond the blood pounding in my ears. Buster shifted, whining softly, and then a low, sustained growl rumbled deep in his chest. It was a warning, a sound I hadn't heard from him since that cursed farm, since the things in the field had turned their empty eyes on me. Then came the howling. It wasn't wolves. It wasn't coyotes. This was something else entirely. It was guttural, mournful, layered, like multiple voices tangled in a dirge, each note striking a primal chord of fear. It started distant, a low, keening wail that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Then it drew closer, circling the camp, growing louder, more insistent, more desperate. It wasn't just sound, it was a physical pressure, vibrating through the thin tent walls, through my bones, shaking me to my core. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated suffering, and something else, a hunger that made my stomach churn. Buster whimpered again, burying his head against my chest, trembling uncontrollably. His fur, usually soft, felt bristly, charged with static electricity. I wrapped my arms around him, clutching him tight, trying to offer comfort I didn't possess. My hand automatically went to my old wristwatch, my thumb tracing the cold metal bezel. My mind screamed at me to grab my mag light, to shine it out there, to confront whatever beast was making those sounds. But the host's words, "Do not use light sources," echoed in my head. And those eyes, those terrible, knowing eyes. I lay awake, clutching the small, heavy pistol I kept in my go bag, its cold grip a small, futile comfort against a terror that felt ancient and unknowable. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, to pack up, to drive away into the blessed anonymity of the highway. But where would I go? Running had never worked before. The things that found me didn't care about state lines or speed limits. They cared about what I was, what I'd survived, what I attracted. Besides, the image of Buster, shivering against me, was a lead weight in my gut. I couldn't just abandon him to whatever lurked outside. My reluctant conscience, that cursed fatal flaw, kept me rooted, paralyzed by a responsibility I hated. The howling continued, receding and advancing, a horrifying symphony that seemed to mock my flimsy shelter. It was louder than the screams from that bus, more guttural than the growls from the man in the walls, and more despairing than anything I'd heard since the impossible whispers on that snow-choked mountain pass. It felt like it was trying to dig its way into my brain, to unearth old terrors, to prove that I was truly, irrevocably broken. Finally, agonizingly, the first slivers of dawn painted the sky a bruised purple, then a pale, hopeful gray. The howling faded, replaced by a lingering, oppressive silence. I breathed, a ragged, shaky exhale that felt like I was expelling all the fear I'd held in for hours. Buster stirred, lifting his head, whimpering softly. He looked as exhausted as I felt. The next day, I ventured out, Buster sticking to my heels like a shadow, his ears perked, his entire body tense. The forest, bathed in the pale morning light, seemed almost normal, beautiful even, with the river meandering through the dense pines, the jagged mountain peaks looming in the distance. But the beauty felt like a deception, a thin veneer over something fundamentally wrong. My survivor's gaze, honed by years of living with the abnormal, picked out details, an unnatural stillness in the air, a faint, metallic tang on the breeze, the absolute absence of small forest sounds. No bird song, no scurrying critters, nothing. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting. I spent the day exploring, half-heartedly trying to find a rational explanation for the sounds of the night, but my mind kept returning to the host's eyes, her voice, those impossible rules. This wasn't a bear or a wolf pack. This was something else, something that demanded ritual obedience. This was a different kind of horror, a primal, territorial one. I checked my wristwatch again. It's ticking a slow, steady pulse against the frantic beat of my heart. Time wasn't just passing, it was being consumed. As dusk approached, a new, heavy dread settled over the camp. The air grew colder, and that faint, unnatural mist began to creep through the trees, swirling at the edges of my clearing like conscious entities. I worked quickly, mechanically, extinguishing the small fire I'd dared to light, securing all my belongings in the bear box, double-checking the tent locks. Every instinct screamed to flee, but I was rooted by that damn conscience, that nagging feeling that running only prolonged the inevitable. And Buster, his unwavering loyalty was both my greatest strength and my most vulnerable weakness. I would not leave him. Back inside the tent, the darkness pressed in, deeper than any night I'd ever known. Buster was already trembling, whimpering softly. My hand went to his fur, stroking it, trying to soothe him, knowing it was futile. The seconds bled into minutes, the minutes into an eternity. My wristwatch felt heavy on my wrist, a constant reminder of the relentless crawl of time. Then, the howling began again, closer this time, accompanied by something infinitely more sinister. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. They weren't shuffling, they were planting, impactful, squelching sounds, as if something impossibly massive was dragging itself through the damp undergrowth, circling my tent. Each step vibrated through the ground, through the thin sleeping pad, directly into my chest. This wasn't a search, it was a patrol, a hunting circle, a low, resonant growl, more a rumble than a sound, vibrated through the air, chilling me to the bone. It was not animalistic in the way a bear's growl is. It was deeper, older, filled with an ancient malevolence that felt older than the mountains themselves. It spoke of hunger, of territory, of things that shouldn't exist. It was the sound that had echoed in my mind after that encounter with the mirror doppelganger, a sound that spoke of something inhuman trying to imitate sentience, trying to force its way into our reality. I held Buster close, his body rigid with terror, his fur bristling against my arm, his heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, desperate drum. The footsteps paused just outside my tent entrance. I could feel the presence, a vast looming shadow against the thin fabric. The air grew impossibly cold, stealing the breath from my lungs. I squeezed my eyes shut, repeating the host's mantra in my head. Ignore any noises. Do not leave your tent. Do not use light. My hands gripped the pistol, but I knew, with a certainty born of bitter experience, that a few rounds of hollow points wouldn't mean a damn thing against whatever was out there. This was a different kind of monster. This was the kind that cared about rules. Then, a deep, raspy exhale, a sound like dry leaves scraping against rock, directly outside the tent. It was cold, bone deep, and I could almost smell its fetid breath through the canvas. It paused, a pregnant silence stretching into an eternity. Every nerve ending screamed at me to open my eyes, to look, to confirm the horror. But the host's voice, a chilling echo in my mind, repeated, never discuss what you see or hear. Looking was seeing was knowing, and knowing in this place meant death. The slow, deliberate crunch of footsteps resumed, circling, then slowly, agonizingly, receding into the oppressive stillness of the night. The guttural hum began to vibrate through the air again, a low, distant tolling, like a funeral bell for the unsuspecting. I lay there, clutching Buster, tears stinging my eyes, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of my helplessness. This was worse than Ethan, the charming cannibal, worse than Mitch, the imposter who'd taken over my friend's skin. Here, I was caged, exposed, and utterly, profoundly alone. Then came the yelps, not Buster's. From the next campsite over, a dog's panicked, desperate cries. followed by silence, a chilling, absolute silence. Then, human voices, distant, desperate, pleading. A woman's high-pitched scream, suddenly cut short. A man's guttural cry, choked off. Silence again. Total, complete, deafening silence. My blood turned to ice. Buster whimpered, burying his head deeper against my chest. He knew. We both knew. Whatever had been circling, whatever had exhaled outside my tent, had moved on. It had chosen a different prey. And now, there was nothing, just the vast black emptiness of the night, punctuated by the faint, distant echo of that mournful, guttural howl, carrying on the wind, a chilling testament to the unseen, unholy feast. The following hours were a disorienting blur of fear, a torturous eternity of dread and helplessness. The howling returned in waves, interspersed with those guttural growls and the unmistakable sounds of heavy movement, branches snapping under immense weight, leaves rustling as something dragged itself through the undergrowth. Deep, labored breathing just outside the flimsy canvas. My mind raced with questions, each more terrifying than the last. What was out there? How close was it now? Could the thin fabric of the tent truly keep us safe? Or was it just a matter of time before it decided my camp was next? I clutched Buster tighter, feeling his trembling body against mine, his fear an almost physical extension of my own. Every creak of the trees, every whisper of the wind seemed amplified, each sound a tiny blade stabbing through the fragile veil of safety. I whispered to myself, just make it until dawn. Over and over, clinging to the thought like a lifeline. It was a mantra, a desperate plea to a hostile universe. Buster pressed against me, whimpering softly, his nose tucked into my armpit. I whispered reassurances, but my own voice shook, a pathetic attempt at calm. This was the kind of terror that made a man pray for unconsciousness, for oblivion. It was the kind of terror that reminded me of the impossible farm, of the true cosmic indifference that lay beyond the veil of life and death. There was no escape, not even in my deepest fear. When dawn finally broke, it brought with it a cold, stark light that revealed a grim scene. My muscles ached, my eyes burned, and my heart felt like a shriveled, bruised thing in my chest. I cautiously unzipped the tent, Buster still glued to my side, sniffing the air nervously. The neighboring campsite was a scene from a nightmare. Blood was smeared across the picnic table, glistening wetly in the morning light. Tuft after tuft of dark fur, clearly not a dog's, was matted into the damp earth, clinging to pine needles and blades of grass. A single, muddy boot lay discarded near the extinguished fire pit. The neighboring RV was abandoned, its door swinging eerily on its hinges, a silent, gaping maw. There was no sign of the family, no sign of their dog. Only the blood in the fur and the overwhelming, lingering scent of something metallic and foul. The host's cryptic warning replayed in my head, a chilling echo. This place is ancient, not meant for our kind. I looked at Buster, his brown eyes wide and fearful, then back at the evidence of unspeakable horror. This wasn't just a place. It was a trap, baited with solitude and peace. I packed up faster than I ever had in my life. Every movement was efficient, driven by a primal need to flee, to put as many miles between myself and that place as humanly possible. My go bag was already packed. Of course, always packed. The tent was crammed into its sack, the sleeping bags rolled tight. Buster, sensing the urgency, didn't need to be told twice to jump into the truck. As I sped down the rutted dirt track, leaving the suffocating shadows of the lodgepole pines behind, a sheriff's patrol car was pulling up, its emergency lights already flashing. I pulled over, my heart hammering. The deputy, a young kid with eyes too innocent for the job, eyed me with suspicion. "You were camping here?" he asked, his gaze lingering on my worn leather jacket, then on the heavily packed bed of my truck. "Just leaving," I said, my voice hoarse. I kept my face blank, my answers short. Slept through the night, heard a few weird howls, but nothing unusual. Thought it was just coyotes. It was a practiced lie, honed over years of dealing with authorities who either couldn't understand or simply refused to believe the kind of things that haunted my reality. He eyed me, clearly unconvinced, but there was nothing to hold me for. I was just another transient, passing through. He mumbled something about checking on the other campers. I just nodded, feigning ignorance, my gaze drifting to my wristwatch, its second hand ticking away the escape. As I drove away, the winding mountain roads unspooling before me, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. The host stood at the entrance to Howling Woods, a tiny, dark figure framed by the menacing trees. Her eyes, even from that distance, seemed to bore into mine. And then, I saw her lips move, mouthing 4 words that sent a fresh wave of ice down my spine, words that echoed with the weight of ancient, unspeakable knowledge. Follow the rules. Always. I never camped overnight again. The mountains still call, a distant siren song of false peace. But their solitude now carries a menacing undertone, a faint, lingering echo of that mournful, guttural howl. It drifts through the silence, like a ghostly reminder, ensuring I never forget the rules of the Howling Woods. Every snap of a twig, every distant howl, every shiver that runs through Buster at night reminds me of that place, of the things that exist just beyond the veil of human understanding, things that demand obedience and feed on fear. Some places are better left undiscovered. Some rules are etched not in ink, but in blood and bone. On the darkest nights, when the world feels silent and still, I swear I feel the presence of those ancient woods pressing against my mind, whispering their secrets in a language I'll never understand. It's as though the Howling Woods have marked me, their eerie song lingering in my bones, a haunting melody I'll carry to my grave. Another layer added to the trauma that defines me, a testament to the cursed life of Leo Vance. Total characters, 9-7-88. The shriek was mine. I knew that much. A raw, animal sound ripped from my throat. My fist connected with something wet and yielding. The sickening crunch of bone and cartilage, a counterpoint to the sudden, blinding flash of agony behind my own right eye. Blood, warm and metallic, bloomed across my face, not from the impact, but from somewhere deeper, an internal rupture. I stumbled back, clutching my throbbing skull, the reflection in the broken glass showing not just my attacker, but myself, bleeding, bewildered, and very, very close to screaming again. That was later, much later, at the point where sanity had already begun to fray around the edges. It started, as these things always do, with a seemingly innocuous phone call and a promise of easy money, luring me into what I mistook for a normal day. It's never a normal day for me, not anymore. Another fine establishment of law and order, I thought, as the squad car coughed its way into the lot of what generously passed for a police station. My gut clenched, the familiar warning bell of impending disaster chiming somewhere in the deeper recesses of my brain. The building itself looked less like a functioning precinct and more like a set piece for a post-apocalyptic B-movie. The police insignia, half buried in a tangled mess of tall, sun-baked weeds, lay crookedly, its metallic gleam long since dulled to a matte gray. The letters PO were missing from the faded sign above the main doors, leaving only lice in their wake, a remarkably fitting, if unintentional, commentary on my general luck. Graffiti, a violent spray of neon obscenities, crawled like festering wounds across the outer walls. If not for the 2 other vehicles at the very back of the lot, both in similarly sorry states, I would have sworn they'd pulled into the wrong address. The patrol cars were no better than the station itself. Their emblem and motto, "To serve and protect," were faded, almost ghostly, smeared with years of road grime and neglect. Tires were flat, slumped in on themselves like deflated balloons, and one's taillight was a shattered mosaic of red plastic. Yeah, warning bells definitely should have gone off in my head. Louder bells, klaxons, even. But if you can't trust the police, who can you trust? A rhetorical question. Given my track record, the answer was usually no one, especially not yourself. I attributed the building's abysmal condition to budget cuts, the kind of deep, vicious cuts that gnawed at the bone. Officers, I'd read somewhere, frequently and openly protested the city's cheap financial support by wearing mismatched socks and all sorts of inappropriate pants, ranging from army print to clown stripes. Maybe this was their ultimate protest, letting the place rot. I snorted, a dry, humorless sound that felt at home in the stifling air. Two officers, both surprisingly bland, escorted me inside. If the main lobby was any indication, then the interior was as poorly maintained as the exterior. The air in here was a thick, wet blanket, clinging to the inside of my lungs. It tasted like static electricity and old blood, a flavor I'd grown to recognize from other places I'd rather forget. I waited by the reception desk, perched on an old schoolhouse chair whose cracked, pea-green back did not match the splintered blonde wood of the two identical chairs next to it. It was like they'd been scavenged from 3 different eras of public school humiliation. While the officers traded a few hushed words with the woman behind the desk, I couldn't help but notice how remarkably similar the 3 of them were. It wasn't just the uniform either, though those were pristine, almost unnervingly so, a stark contrast to their surroundings. No, it was more fundamental. The 3 were the same height, possessed the exact same shade, and cut of dark, uninteresting hair, carried themselves with an identical, almost robotic posture, and shared the same lean, athletic build. Too neat, too uniform, beyond what even the most disciplined police force could achieve. It pricked at that old, familiar sensation, the one that whispered wrong. It was the same feeling that had coiled in my gut when Mitch's voice had changed that night, or when I'd realized the walls themselves were breathing. My hand, without conscious thought, went to my old analog wristwatch, tracing the worn metal of the crown, a small, futile attempt to ground myself in something tangible, something that actually moved at a predictable pace. "Excuse me," I interrupted, my voice sounding oddly strained in the oppressive silence. I walked over to the trio, the worn leather of my jacket squeaking faintly with the movement. It was a familiar comfort, a second skin that had seen more nightmares than most men lived in a lifetime. One of the officers who'd brought me in turned towards me, his face a perfectly blank canvas. "What?" he asked, his tone devoid of inflection, like a recording played on a loop. I motioned to a chipped ceramic mug full of cheap plastic pens on the counter. "Can I have one?" I asked, trying for casual, hoping it masked the uneasy tremor in my hands. "Yeah, sure," he replied, his gaze drifting over my shoulder, as if he found the peeling paint on the far wall more interesting than my request. His eyes were a startlingly pale blue, like chipped ice. I pocketed the pen happily, a small, petty victory. If I was going to be stuck here all evening, subjected to whatever this was, at least I'd get a souvenir. The 3 continued their hushed, emotionless conversation while I returned to my mismatched chair, waiting in the humid, stagnant lobby. Couldn't they at least open a window? Get a breeze rolling? The air was so thick and tasted so bitter that I could barely breathe. It felt like being sealed in a jar. I tried to focus on Buster, my scruffy terrier mix, back in the motel room. He was my anchor, my one consistent, untainted thing in a life that was otherwise a carousel of horrors. God, I hoped he was okay. Curled up on the old futon in my current dump of an apartment, oblivious to this particular brand of hell. Once the officers sorted everything out, I had no idea what everything entailed. Given their almost telepathic lack of spoken words, they led me down a long, dirty corridor, dried leaves, Skeletal remains of autumn littered the ground, crunching under my worn boots as I walked. Surely, they could find room in their budget for a janitor. As we moved through the station, the decay seemed to deepen. Missing doors, like absent teeth in a skeletal maw, gaped into darkened rooms. Broken windows stared out blankly, exposing the guts of the building to the elements. I even saw a jagged hole in the roof, a tear in the fabric of the sky. Frankly, I half expected to see a family of raccoons scurrying about, making a nest in the broken filing cabinets. There also seemed to be a surprisingly small roster of officers on duty in the station. We seemed to pass the same two guys almost everywhere we went, their identical faces popping up like bad penny apparitions. It was like a glitch in a cheap simulation, making me feel like I was caught in some endless, repeating loop. "In here," said one of the uniformed men, motioning to a set of double doors that looked like they hadn't been painted since the Truman administration. "We'll come get you when it's time." I nodded, my throat suddenly dry, and stepped through the doors. The smell on the other side was even worse than in the lobby, if that was possible. It was a sickening, cloying mix of sweat, ozone, and that unique, unsettling odor of slightly burnt skin after a few hours under a merciless summer sun. Unsurprisingly, the room was full of men, maybe a dozen or so, all with eerily similar features to my own. Aside from one old man huddled in the corner, we also looked about the same age, roughly mid-30s, just past the point where youthful optimism completely gives way to weary resignation. "Guess we're all here for the lineup, huh?" I asked, forcing a cheerful tone, an attempt to break the ice and inject some semblance of normalcy into the suffocating atmosphere. The others averted their gazes, a ripple of unease passing through them. The situation wasn't ideal, missing the season finale of my favorite show for this, but I saw no reason to be sour about it. It was our civic duty, and being grumpy wouldn't change a thing. We'd all been cherry-picked, I assumed, to act as distractors in a police lineup. I hadn't been particularly thrilled when the police officers stopped me on my way home from work, telling me I matched the description of a violent mugger. But I calmed down once they reassured me that I was not the suspect, merely a decoy, a cog in the machine, a disposable piece. The old man's head rose slowly, his movement stiff, like a marionette with tangled strings. His eyes, though clouded with age, met mine with a profound sadness. "Son," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper that seemed to echo in the oppressive quiet. "You won't be leaving anytime soon." When I saw his face fully, a gasp caught in my throat. He was old. Yes, undeniably so. But his facial features were remarkably similar to my own. Beyond similar. We had the same shade of green eyes, curved nose, and the exact same set of high cheekbones. If we were to walk around town together, people would surely assume he was my dad. My reflection, aged by half a century and then some. "Oh, well, that's okay. I'm not in a rush," I answered cheerfully, trying to sound more convinced than I felt. My hand went to my watch again, checking the time that seemed to crawl. My gaze shifted from the old man to the others in the room. Each face I looked at was a variation on a theme, a disturbing kaleidoscope of my own features. We all shared a remarkable likeness, a common template that was growing increasingly unnerving. Whoever the victim was, they'd have a hell of a hard time identifying the attacker. No one stood out. Even I would have trouble telling us apart. A thought that should have been amusing but instead sent a cold tendril of fear coiling in my gut. I thought the others would be as amused as I was, a shared moment of bizarre camaraderie. But they all kept to themselves, their shoulders hunched, their faces drawn and pale, unable to find a conversational partner. I took a seat so I could wait for the officer to return. The silence started making me nervous, a profound, heavy silence, as though everyone knew a secret I wasn't privy to, a joke whose punchline I hadn't heard. Every now and again, I caught them glancing at me from the corner of their eyes, their gazes quick and furtive, filled with a strange mix of pity and dread. It was deeply unnerving. Silence. It was so quiet that I could hear the faint, sickly hum of neon lights all the way down the hall, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the building. They played in peculiar unison, a low, atonal drone, like instruments in a macabre orchestra. The air grew heavier, pressing down on my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. It was the same gut-wrenching certainty I'd felt on that long, lonely road when the hitchhiker had opened his mouth, or in that pristine, antique-filled house where Olivia had laid out her gruesome carpet. This place reeked of the same wrongness. The universe, I'd learned, was a vast, indifferent farm, and I was just another piece of livestock. The door creaked open, a sound like a tortured moan. The others in the room flinched, cringed, and recoiled as an officer stepped inside. I honestly couldn't tell if it was one of the two that had driven me in, or a different officer altogether. Their faces were too similar, too interchangeable, like mass-produced dolls. It was only when I saw him standing next to the other men in the room that the full, chilling realization crashed over me. He, too, could pass as one of us. The pale eyes, the high cheekbones, the set of the jaw. He looked like me, like us. My skin crawled, 1,000 tiny insects marching across my flesh, at the eerie, undeniable truth that everyone I had seen in the past hour or so looked just like me. How had I not noticed sooner? How had I been so blind? I tried to shake the unsettling feeling away with a forced shiver, a physical attempt to dislodge the dread, but I was only half successful. It stuck to me like tar. The officer lifted a hand, his index finger, long and unblemished, pointing precisely at 6 of us. You there, you two, you, and you, by the wall, he commanded, his voice flat, devoid of the usual police cadence. I got up and walked over, a sense of resigned fatalism washing over me. Of course I was chosen. The others, the 5 singled out, gasped and groaned, their earlier stoicism crumbling into open, raw fear. They approached reluctantly, like condemned men walking to the gallows. Though I did not fully understand their gloomy reactions, a dark, cold part of me felt the same way. Still, the quicker we went through the lineup, the quicker we'd get to go home. I, for one, was grimly glad I'd been chosen to be part of Group 1. Get it over with. The officer handed out numbered boards. My board, Nushfisse, looked ancient, as if it had been passed down through generations of decoys. Its corners were rounded with wear, the dark wood smoothed by countless nervous hands. Coffee stains coated the surface like ancient hieroglyphs. In yellowing, brittle tape kept portions of it from falling apart entirely. The others took their boards with as much enthusiasm as a kid handed a plateful of steamed broccoli. I'd never seen grown men quite manage the childlike look of disgust and accompanying pout until that day. They looked like kids forced to eat boiled sprouts and endure a visit from a distant, creepy uncle. I was starting to understand why. This wasn't just civic duty. This felt like a trap. It dragged me back to Mitch's apartment, the cold dread of realizing someone you knew, someone you trusted, wasn't who they seemed, or that thing in the walls, breathing, watching. Once we received our numbers, we were ushered into a suffocatingly narrow room with doors on both ends. I heard the thick thud of a lock engaging behind us, the sound echoing ominously in the tight space. It made me wonder if the mugger was in the room with me. But no, that was ridiculous. Fortunately, I was at a police station. If there was one place a violent mugger wouldn't try anything stupid, it'd be in the middle of a police station, right? The back wall was decorated in faded height lines, like those seen in mugshots. They made me realize that, strangely enough, we were all the exact same height, right down to the half-inch. It was unnatural, a physical impossibility for 6 randomly selected men. In front of us was a large glass pane through which we could clearly see a pair of identical-looking police officers sitting on stools, watching us. That's odd, I remembered thinking, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Don't they usually use double-sided mirrors for these things? The glass was too clear, too reflective of our own anxious faces. It was a window, not a shield. "Not me, not me, not me," murmured number 3, his voice a dry, reedy whisper, quivering with palpable fear. He was running his hands through his hair, his eyes wide and fixed on nothing. He wasn't the only one acting strangely. Number 1 and number 4 were huddled in the far corner, facing away from the window, their shoulders pressed against the wall as if trying to merge with it. Number 2 and number 6 were fidgeting, their eyes darting wildly, whispering beneath their breaths, a low, frantic drone that seemed to vibrate in the air. Grow up, I thought, trying to quell the rising panic in my own chest. Why were they all so nervous? Was I missing something obvious? Could we get in trouble if we were mistakenly identified? The question was rhetorical, but the answer was becoming frighteningly clear. Yes, we were in trouble, deep trouble. Every fiber of my being wanted to bolt, to smash a fist through the glass, to do anything but stand there like a lamb at the slaughter. Then the victim walked into the room on the other side of the glass, even though he held his head low, shrouded in shadows. I couldn't help but notice the chilling similarities. He had my build, the same slightly slumped shoulders, and my haircut, the same unruly dark waves that always refused to lie flat. His body was covered in bruises, a sickening tapestry of purple and blue, and his white shirt was stained with dark, crusty blood. I felt a chill run down the back of my neck, filling me with the same anxious dread that radiated off my fellow distractors. A primal feeling in my gut urged me to run away, yet I found myself paralyzed with unexplainable fear, rooted to the spot. This was silly. There was no reason to be afraid, or so I desperately hoped. My nervousness increased with every slow, deliberate step the victim took. He looked pretty banged up, that was for sure. There was no reason to think he hadn't been attacked by a mugger, a common enough occurrence in any city. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something else, something far more insidious, was going on. The victim's head slowly turned upwards. He looked at each of us in turn, his gaze lingering, searching. The silence stretched, thin and brittle, ready to snap. "Oh, God," I whispered, the words catching in my throat, a mere puff of air. I was looking at myself. He wasn't just a crude look-alike like the others. No, he was definitely me. Even through the swollen, split lip and the grotesque black eye that bloomed like a bruised plum, I recognized every square inch of my face, the specific placement of my constellation of freckles across the bridge of my nose, the faint, jagged childhood scar along my hairline from that stupid bike accident when I was 7, my right eye, which was subtly, almost imperceptibly, smaller than the left. He had them all. It was my worst nightmare, staring at me from every angle, like that damned mirror in The Thing That Looked Back. My double, my dark reflection, standing before me. I didn't have time to fully take in the phenomena, to reconcile what my eyes were telling me with what my brain insisted was impossible. Before the doppelganger lifted his arm, a skeletal finger, trembling with accusatory intent, outstretched. I knew before he even did it. I knew he was going to point to me. I knew. Yet it didn't spare me the shock when he did it. It felt like being smacked in the face by a stray baseball, a sudden, concussive blow that rattled my teeth. He pointed straight at me, an electrifying feeling surging through my body as he did so. A jolt, pure and cold, shot through me, rooting me to the spot even as my mind screamed for escape. If that wasn't bad enough, the others in the lineup suddenly calmed down. The tension drained from their shoulders. Their faces slackened with relief. They looked like they just dodged a bullet, which only sent me into a full-blown panic. When I saw the 2 identical police officers rise from their seats on the other side of the glass, their pale eyes fixed on me with chilling intent, I knew I had to run. There was no explanation, no arguing, no reasoning with whatever fresh hell this was. I bolted, pure adrenaline coursing through my veins like liquid fire, towards the emergency exit at the far end of the room. The door was locked, of course, always locked. I could hear the distinct jingle of keys from the other side of the room, followed by the heavy clunk of a lock mechanism. There was no doubt in my mind that the officers were coming for me, with a fair dose of adrenaline fueling my actions, pushing my body beyond its limits. I grabbed the heavy, cylindrical fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. Its cold metal felt like a lifeline in my trembling hands. I swung it, a desperate, clumsy arc, smashing it against the doorknob. The first blow merely dented the cheap brass. The second cracked the door frame. It took 3 tries, my muscles screaming in protest, but it finally broke off, splintering the wood, allowing the door to swing open just as the cops came in from the other end of the room, their faces still eerily blank, their movements synchronized. I could vaguely hear them shouting, though I could not make out a word of what they were saying over the combined sounds of my frantic heartbeat, a drum solo of terror, and the rushing of blood in my head. I ran as fast as my feet allowed, the worn soles of my boots slapping against the grimy linoleum, feeling myself drowning in unexplainable fear, a cold, dark current dragging me under. Lost. I was utterly lost. Lost in the building, a labyrinth of decaying corridors. Lost in the suffocating embrace of fear. Lost in desperate and unshakable panic. An alarm went off then, a piercing, metallic shriek that echoed through the station, practically paralyzing me with its insistent, wailing urgency. More than ever, I wanted to escape this endless maze of rundown hallways and broken light fixtures, where every shadow seemed to twist into something menacing. I could barely hear the officers' pounding footsteps over the mechanical warning call, but my senses, honed by years of running from things that shouldn't exist, were just sharp enough that I could safely evade them, weaving through the decrepit architecture like a rat in a crumbling maze. Every turning was identical, every door a faded reflection of the last. It was a nightmare of repetition. I ran for what felt like hours, though it could have been mere minutes. Time lost all meaning in that place. I ran until my chest burned with exhaustion, a searing pain that radiated from my lungs, and my muscles cramped, stiffening into painful knots. I ran until I came across a familiar sight, the waiting room from where I'd been in earlier, hoping to warn the others, perhaps even to find a moment of respite. I stumbled inside. The room was empty, but for the old man in the back corner, he was still there, hunched over, motionless. My heart leaped with a flicker of hope, however dim. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice raw, ragged. "We've got to get out of here, now!" He didn't answer, didn't stir. A cold dread, colder than anything I'd felt before, began to seep into my bones. I walked closer, my footsteps strangely loud in the silence, and noticed something on his head. My scar. That's impossible, I thought, a desperate, animalistic gasp escaping my lips. The truth, when it hit me, was a physical blow. That scar, my scar. The jagged line above the old man's brow was identical to the one I carried, a permanent reminder of a childhood fall, a misstep on a curb, stitches, and my mother's worried face. My childhood, his skin, a mottled, sun-dried parchment, like a forgotten apple left on a windowsill for a month, was stretched tight over his skeletal features. His eyes were open, but blank, staring at something beyond my comprehension. He was dead, and he was me. I recoiled in terror, a loud, primal scream tearing itself from my throat. My mind reeled, trying to grasp the horrific impossibility of it all. Suddenly, I felt a pair of cold, strong fingers digging into my shoulder with the crushing strength of a crocodile's jaw, locking me in place. Again, I shouted, a desperate, guttural sound, wildly swatting at the captor's hand. By twisting my shoulder uncomfortably, pulling against the searing pain, I managed to break free of the vice-like grip and spin around, only to be confronted with my bruised doppelganger. The same ruined face I'd seen in the lineup room. A look of bitter contempt, a mirror of every resentful thought I'd ever harbored, had found a permanent home on his features. I never realized how unsettling that look was when I gave it to others, how utterly devoid of humanity. My look-alike deliberately blocked the exit, his body a solid, immovable wall, ensuring that escape would not be easy. He took a slow, deliberate step towards me, his bruised face a mask of cold fury. I acted on instinct, pure survival overriding every other thought, and felt my arm flying towards his face, a desperate, flailing punch. The sound of broken glass erupted from him, a sickening, crystalline crunch, as my fist connected with his already damaged eye. Pain. Sharp, blinding pain. 1,000 tiny shards of glass exploding behind my own right eye. 1,000 needles plunging into the optic nerve. I stumbled to the side, clutching my throbbing skull, my vision blurring into a kaleidoscopic swirl of agony and dark shapes. It thumped and prickled with 1,000 needles, each beat of my heart sending a fresh wave of nausea through me. My vision became blurry, but not blurry enough to keep me from seeing the other me run towards me, a distorted, vengeful specter. I had to defend myself. I punched, elbowed, and jabbed at him, every move a desperate attempt to create space, to survive. Few of my blows actually connected. I'm not exactly a martial arts expert, more of a flail and hope kind of guy, but the ones that did sent sharp, reciprocal pain flooding into my own body, an unbearable feedback loop. My frantic blitz came to an end when I went for his stomach, a desperate shove more than a punch. The impact nearly took my breath away. There was no beating him. I had to run. I shoved him aside with all the strength I had left, fully expecting him to try and grab me, to wrestle me to the ground. To my surprise, he stumbled, then fell to the floor, collapsing in a heap, and didn't try to get up. Had I hurt him more than I thought? Or was he simply breaking? My relief was short-lived, a fleeting whisper of hope in a hurricane of dread. As soon as I stepped back out into the hallway, leaning heavily against the doorframe, I ran into a pair of officers. Their expressions were strangely blank, devoid of any discernible emotion, like wax figures. A sudden, chilling thought came to mind when I realized that I was covered in bruises. The same bruises I'd seen on my doppelganger. What if they thought I was the victim? Or worse, what if I was the victim now? "He's in there," I said, my voice raspy, mustering up every bit of calm that I could manage, pointing a trembling finger back into the room. It was a gamble, a desperate lie. The officers, without hesitating, their movements still unnervingly synchronized, ran into the waiting area. I didn't know how long my ruse would work, how long they'd be fooled. So I took off towards the entrance, my injured eye throbbing with every frantic step. When I reached the lobby, gasping for air, the receptionist from earlier stood up and turned to me. I only looked at her for a moment, a fleeting glance, but my eyes caught sight of it. My scar, the unmistakable childhood mark, clearly visible on her forehead. What the hell? There was no time to think or try to understand. My face everywhere. This place was a hall of mirrors, and every reflection was a trap. She started chasing after me, her footsteps a chilling echo of my own. So I ran out the doors as fast as my battered legs could carry me. The air outside smelled so fresh, so clean, devoid of the stagnant, metallic aftertaste that had choked me in the police station. It was dark out, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows. And I remember feeling a desperate flicker of hope that I could blend into the comforting anonymity of the night and escape this surreal nightmare. But then I heard stomping footsteps behind me, heavy and relentless. Beams of harsh, white light sliced through the darkness, sweeping across my back, illuminating me like a target. I could hear sirens blaring in the distance, growing louder, closer, a mournful wail that echoed the scream still trapped in my throat. I recall running, a desperate, headlong flight, but I confess, I don't remember how I got home. I have no recollection of reaching my apartment complex, unlocking my door, or collapsing into bed. The details are a hazy, terrified blur, but I must have. I woke up this morning safe and sound in my bed, albeit quite sore. Every muscle aching, every bone protesting. The memory of the previous night was a jumbled nightmare mosaic, but it was real. When I got up to brush my teeth, my reflection sent a fresh shiver down my spine, a cold serpent coiling in my gut. My face was bruised and swollen, a grotesque caricature of my normal self. The wounds were identical, precisely identical, to the ones I saw on the victim at the police station. The busted lip, the black eye, the nasty cut on his cheek, they were all there, perfectly replicated on my own face. My heart raced wildly, blurry after images dancing in my head. Running, police officers, my face everywhere. As I leaned back against the cool tile of the bathroom wall, a sudden weight in my pocket snagged my attention. I reached for it, my fingers closing around a small, smooth object. I retrieved the pen I'd taken from the police station, inspecting it closely. The city police motto was written on it, though half of it was scratched out, defaced, as if by design. It read in faded, cheap ink. To serve, it didn't say who or what, just to serve. I tossed the pen onto the counter, the hollow click echoing in the small room. The thought hit me then, a cold, hard certainty. I wasn't just a decoy, I was the next victim, and the one after that. Just another cog in a broken, bleeding machine. Character count, 9 or 738. The warmth of their blood on my face was a lie. Not mine, not yet. A hair's breadth. That's all it took for another poor bastard's brains to decorate the cold steel floor instead of my own. My heart was a drum solo against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of survival, fear, and the sickening realization that I was already knee-deep in a slaughterhouse, and the real show hadn't even begun. My vision, still swimming with the ghost of a falling body, clung to the impossible, indifferent gleam of the fluorescent lights high above, their incessant hum a perverse lullaby in this mausoleum of steel and despair. It felt like a lifetime had passed since the sterile white van had snatched me off that desolate highway, since the muffled voices and the sudden prick of a needle had stolen my last sliver of autonomy. Now, standing among 100 terrified strangers in an arena that swallowed sound, the echoes of that betrayal still clung to me, a faint metallic taste on my tongue. This was the opportunity they'd promised, wasn't it? The grand prize, the life-changing sum. Just another bait and switch, a cruel joke whispered by the universe specifically for me. My hand, without conscious thought, found the cold steel of my worn analog wristwatch, tracing the rim of its face, not for the time, never for the time, just a small, familiar anchor in a world that had, once again, tilted off its axis. The room was too large to be real, a stadium-like arena designed to make 100 souls feel utterly insignificant. Its high metal walls towered over us like prison bars, or perhaps the polished, clinical sides of a dissection chamber. The cold, industrial glow of fluorescent lights, buzzing like trapped insects, hummed faintly above, casting a pale, sterile light onto the players. 99 of us now. I reminded myself with a fresh wave of nausea. We stood in stiff, uneasy lines, our breath shallow, eyes darting nervously, searching for answers in each other's panicked faces. The air, thick with unspoken fear, tasted of sweat, of desperation, and of something acrid, metallic. The lingering ghost of fear from the ones who had been here before us. Perhaps, or maybe, the scent of the one who had just joined them. A voice, mechanical and detached, blared from unseen speakers, cutting through the low murmur of our collective dread like a scalpel. Welcome, esteemed players. Congratulations on making it this far. Esteemed players, my ass. I thought, my lips barely twitching. We're cattle, or maybe just the entertainment. My leather jacket, my only true companion for years, felt heavier than usual on my shoulders, a familiar weight that somehow offered no comfort in this alien, unforgiving space. It always did this world. Drag me in, chew me up, spit me out, just another Tuesday. You have been chosen to participate in a series of games, each one designed to test your strength, your intelligence, and your will to survive. The prize? A life-changing sum of $45.6 billion. The cost of failure? Your life. A sharp, cynical laugh threatened to claw its way up my throat. $45 billion. Right. And I was supposed to believe they just stumbled upon 100 random schmucks to offer this to. My kind of luck, though. The kind that offers you a pot of gold, then tells you it's buried at the bottom of a live volcano. This wasn't a game, it was a trap. Every cell in my body screamed to bolt, to find a crack in the wall, a loose vent, anything that could lead me out of this steel coffin. But years of experience, of encountering the inexplicable horrors the world seemed so keen on throwing my way, had taught me that these places rarely had convenient exits, and the ones that did usually led to something worse. Before we begin, let us remind you of the rules. There will be no quitting once the games have commenced. Any attempt to break the rules will result in immediate elimination. Your only path forward is to play, to win, to survive. The words echoed, chillingly clear. No quitting. That settled it then. No easy way out. Just the long, hard slog through whatever fresh hell they had cooked up. My eyes scanned the faces around me. A young woman with her hair pulled back tightly, eyes wide and fixed on the unseen speakers. An older man, his face a roadmap of worry lines, kept clenching and unclenching his fists. A muscular guy, probably thought he could punch his way out, was already looking for a weakness in the steel walls. All of them, just like me, had been lured here by some improbable promise, probably out of desperation or foolish hope. Hope. That was the real killer. I'd lost mine years ago, somewhere in the ashes of a house that shouldn't have burned, leaving me with only the grim knowledge that survival was an endless, exhausting marathon. Now, the first game will begin. This is Red Rover. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Red Rover, that old playground game? A few players exchanged glances, confusion momentarily outweighing fear. My own mind snagged on the name. It felt wrong, like calling a meat grinder a tickle machine. Too innocent, too benign for this place, this voice, this overwhelming sense of dread. The rules are simple. Players will be divided into two lines, facing each other. When your name is called, you must run. Your goal is to break through the linked hands of the opposing line. The faster you run, the better your chance of survival. I snorted internally. Simple. Nothing was ever simple. Simple got you killed. Simple was what they said right before the bottom dropped out. However, be warned, resistance will be stronger than expected. Failing to break through may result in severe consequences. The voice paused, a dramatic beat that left the air vibrating with unspoken menace. Remember, hesitation is not an option. Strength alone will not save you. Only those who adapt will move forward. Adapt, right. Always a good buzzword in a corporate hellscape. Here, it sounded like a death sentence delivered with a smile. If you fail, you will be eliminated. The murmurs died instantly. A hush fell over the room, thick and suffocating. The buzzing of the light seemed to intensify, burrowing into my skull. My hand gripped the watch again, the metal cold against my skin, a stark contrast to the sudden clamminess of my palm. "What do they mean by eliminated?" someone whispered, their voice barely more than a breath, brittle with a terror that was about to become universal. A chill ran down my spine, a cold serpent uncoiling in my gut. The word lingered in the air, heavy, suffocating. The mechanical voice had said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, but now it clawed at my mind like something dark and inescapable, pulling on old, familiar scars. Then the realization slammed into me, cold and sharp as a surgeon's blade. Eliminated doesn't mean removed. It doesn't mean sent home. It doesn't mean you pack your bags and get a consolation prize. It means dead. It meant a dirt nap or a steel floor nap, as the case may be. The air in my lungs turned to stone. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs, too loud, too fast. A frantic drummer beating a rhythm of impending doom. My fingers curled into fists, nails digging into my palms. The small pain a desperate attempt to ground myself in reality. I glanced at the faces around me, some still wearing faint traces of confusion, others already pale with dread, their eyes mirroring the horror I felt blossoming in my own chest. A couple of them, the optimists, were still looking around like there was a hidden camera, like this was all some elaborate prank show. Bless their naive little hearts. They hadn't seen what I'd seen. We were never meant to walk away from this easily. We were never meant to just lose a game. We were meant to die. This was a meat locker, and we were the livestock. A bitter wave of regret washed over me, suffocating, relentless. This was supposed to be a simple game, something ridiculous, something I could laugh about later. Run, break a line, go home with some money. That was the illusion I had allowed myself to believe, probably out of some lingering, idiotic sliver of hope that the universe wasn't always out to get me. But now, the truth was carved into the walls, written in the blood pooling at our feet. This wasn't just a game, it was a hunt, and we were the prey. The old, familiar chill of true terror. The one that meant the rules of the world had just broken, just like they did that night, years ago, when the only game was survival, and the prize was just drawing another breath. My chest tightened. The realization was paralyzing, but I couldn't afford to freeze. If I stopped moving, if I hesitated for even a second, I'd be next. I had to win. I had to push everything else aside. The horror, the fear, the sickening churn in my gut. There's no turning back. No go bag waiting by a door I could flee through. The only way out was forward, through the blood, through the chaos, through the bodies that would inevitably fall before this was over. I clenched my fists, forcing my breath to steady. I would survive. I had to. Because if I didn't, who would remember the absurdity of it all? Two groups of 50 were formed, standing opposite each other. The distance between us was unnervingly vast, a stretch of polished concrete that felt like a runway to hell. Too much space for something simple, too much room for something to go horribly wrong. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. My number, 045, was displayed on my uniform in stark black ink, a mark of my existence in this twisted game. Just a number, stripped of identity, reduced to something disposable. My mind raced, replaying every decision that led me here. Did I really think this was just a game? That I would play, win some money, and walk away? The realization slammed into me. There is no walking away, only moving forward or falling like the others. A monitor flickered to life above us, displaying a random name. The first sacrifice. Player 089, step forward. A young man, no older than 20, stumbled out, eyes wide with disbelief, his mouth working. No, please, Then, just for a moment, a flicker of relief washed over my face. Relief that it wasn't my number called. A bitter, fleeting breath escaped my lips before I even realized it. But it's short-lived, chased immediately by a sickening guilt that gripped my stomach. I shouldn't feel relieved. I shouldn't feel anything but dread. Because soon, my turn would come, and I had a feeling the universe had a special kind of dread reserved just for me. A click sounded from above, sharp and precise. A turret emerged from the ceiling, its metallic whine barely audible, locking onto him with an almost casual grace. It was a kill mechanism, sleek and utterly devoid of humanity. Step forward or be eliminated immediately. His legs moved before his brain did. Shaking, he took a hesitant step forward, but then his body locked up, a terrified statue. His eyes darted to the sides, searching for an escape, for someone to save him, for a flicker of compassion. He found none. His breath quickened. Then, suddenly, he whirled around as if to run back, to somehow escape the unseen gaze of the turret. A final, desperate, futile act of defiance. A sharp twang pierced the air, impossibly loud in the sudden, absolute silence. A single arrow, a blur of gleaming steel, tore through his skull with brutal efficiency, the impact jerking his body backward as if yanked by an invisible string. Blood sprayed outward, a sickening crimson mist, warm and thick, splattering against my face. My breath caught. A jagged gasp. The wet metallic scent filled my nostrils, turning my stomach. Screams erupted from the crowd, raw and primal. Chaos unfurled like a storm. Players stumbled back, hands clamped over their mouths, eyes wide with terror. Someone dropped to their knees, sobbing, the sound echoing hollowly. My own body trembled, a tremor that started in my knees and rattled up through my chest. I lifted a trembling hand to my cheek, my fingers coming away slick and red. The warmth of the blood a gruesome testament to the horror. The truth was undeniable now. There was no mercy here, no mistakes, no second chances. Step forward when called. Hesitation will not be tolerated. The voice crackled from the speakers, mechanical and cold, as if nothing had just happened, as if a life, a singular, unique human existence, had not just been stolen in an instant. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. My legs felt like they might collapse beneath me. This isn't a game. It's an execution, a production, and we were the unwilling actors. Red Rover had begun. One by one, names were called. Each runner faced the same choice, break through or die. The arbitrary nature of it all was almost as terrifying as the violence. They could have picked any of us. They would pick any of us. My eyes tracked each desperate sprint, each brutal impact. Some made it, their bodies colliding into the linked arms with savage force, the sheer momentum sending players sprawling across the cold, unyielding floor. A few managed to stumble forward, chests heaving, eyes wide with the manic gleam of those who had just escaped death's grip. The moment they crossed the invisible line, their knees buckled, some collapsing onto the floor in shaking relief, their hands clutching at their throats as if still gasping for air. A mix of hysterical laughter and strangled sobs rippled through the survivors, but none of them looked victorious, only haunted, like they'd stared into the abyss and it had grinned back. They looked exactly how I felt. Others weren't so lucky. Some were caught mid-air, their ribs crushed between locked arms, a sickening crunch that made my teeth ache. Some hit the ground wrong, snapping their own limbs in the process, their screams cut short by the swift, silent arrow. And for those who failed, for those who simply didn't break through, the floor panel beneath them yawned open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a black abyss. The elimination followed, swift and final, a quiet thud and then silence. No screams from below, just the cold, mechanical hum and the knowledge that one more was gone. I watched, my hands sweating, my heartbeat a deafening roar in my ears, a frantic drum solo against my ribs. Each death was a fresh crack in the fragile wall of my composure, another layer of scar tissue over an already raw soul. Then, the screen flickered again. My breath hitched. I knew this feeling. The universe was tightening its grip. Player 045, step forward. My number. My breath hitched. My heart hammered, a frantic drum solo against my ribs. My name, or rather, my assigned identity, echoing through the cavernous space. I didn't move, not because I refused, but because my legs wouldn't work. They were suddenly made of lead, rooted to the cold, unforgiving floor. A sharp beep sounded overhead, a cold, mechanical signal that felt like the tolling of a death bell. My breath stuttered, my muscles stiffened, cold and unresponsive. "Move! Move now, you idiot!" I forced one foot forward, but the weight of terror anchored me down, a crushing, invisible force. My body felt disconnected, like I was watching myself from somewhere far away, a detached observer to my own impending demise. The vast, empty space ahead yawned like an abyss, its silence more terrifying than the screams behind me, more chilling than the thought of the turret above. Every step felt like I was sinking deeper into something I couldn't escape. My legs trembled violently. I took another step, a clumsy, desperate shuffle. Then, instinct kicked in, raw and animalistic, overriding the paralysis. A primal scream from the deepest, oldest part of my brain, the part that had survived Sycamore Grove, the part that had kept me moving from town to town. My body recoiled, as if some unseen force was shoving me backward, away from the path of the unseen arrow. My breath was ragged, my pulse erratic, thundering in my ears. My vision blurred for a moment, panic pressing against my ribs like a vice, sucking the air from my lungs. I can't do this. I have to turn back. I have to run. I have to escape. I twisted, my body moving before my mind could catch up. A desperate lurch to the side, away from the spotlight. Then, a sharp click, a deafening twang, a blur of steel, a searing whistle through the air. Something hot splashed across my cheek. I froze. The room spun. My breath shuddered as I lifted a trembling hand to my face. My fingers came away wet, warm, red, not mine. A body collapsed beside me with a sickening thud, a hollow sound against the concrete. The lifeless eyes of another player stared blankly up at the ceiling, unseeing, reflecting the cold fluorescent glow. An arrow, a cruel steel feather, protruded from their skull, blood pooling beneath them in slow, creeping tendrils, black in the sterile light. The screams began again, raw, horrified, deafening. My pulse hammered wildly as I forced myself to look away, my entire body shaking with the force of my breaths, a full-body dry heave threatening to overtake me. That could have been me. That almost was me. The universe, in its infinite cruelty, had decided to spare me, to let someone else take the hit, just like it always did. A survivor's guilt, an old, familiar ache coiled in my gut. Step forward when called. Hesitation will not be tolerated. The voice over the speakers was indifferent, void of emotion, as if announcing the arrival of a train rather than a death sentence. As if the blood still drying on my face was nothing but a smudge. I could still feel the warmth of the blood seeping into my skin, the sticky horror of it. This is no game. This is slaughter. My turn. My second chance. Purchased with someone else's life. I could feel the eyes of the other players on me, the survivors looking at me with a mixture of fear and, perhaps, the dawning understanding that this was a lottery of death, and I had just won one round. The opposing line was waiting. Among them, I saw a girl, Mina. I recognized her instantly. We met earlier, just before the game was announced, when the tension in the waiting area was almost unbearable. A quiet conversation, an exchange of nervous glances, a mutual understanding that we were both trapped in something far beyond our control. She had been calmer than most, sharper, analyzing the situation instead of panicking like the others. I remembered the way she sized me up, her eyes assessing, as if trying to decide whether I was an ally or just another obstacle to overcome. And now, standing in the line ahead of me, she met my gaze again, this time with something more than curiosity. Unlike the others, she wasn't trembling, she wasn't afraid, She was calculating. She watched me with sharp, calculating eyes, sizing me up, already thinking ahead. There was a flicker there, a silent challenge, or perhaps a warning. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "Run!" It was a whisper in my head, the voice of pure, unadulterated instinct. I pushed off the ground. My body moved on instinct, legs pumping, arms swinging, breath burning in my lungs. Faster, faster. The concrete blurred beneath my worn boots. My eyes scanned the opposing line, a wall of strained faces and locked arms. Who looked the weakest? Who looked scared? Who looked like they were already giving up? I saw a tremor in one man's grip, a slight give in a woman's shoulder. I chose a weak point. Survival was about finding the crack in the wall, even if it meant breaking someone else in the process. My reluctant conscience gave a tiny, nearly imperceptible twitch, then quickly silenced itself. This wasn't the time for niceties. I lowered my shoulder and threw myself forward, all my weight behind the impact. A desperate, animalistic lunge, a sickening collision. My body slammed against locked arms, the force sending shockwaves through my bones, rattling my teeth. I heard a grunt of pain, a gasp. For a moment, nothing moved. The line held. My momentum stalled. No, not like this. Then what? With a sudden, tearing sound, the grip gave way. I fell forward, tumbling onto the rough concrete, chest heaving. My hands scraped against the ground, but I barely registered the pain. I made it. I was through. I scrambled to my feet, gasping for air, lungs burning. I turned back, expecting relief, expecting to simply walk to the survivor's side of the arena. Instead, I saw Mina lying on the ground, a small cry escaping her lips. Her arm, the one that had locked with another, was bruised but intact. She grimaced, clutching it with a pained expression, but she was alive. I had aimed for the weakness. Yes, but her arms were part of the weak point. I had broken through her. I hesitated. I didn't know why. It was a stupid, dangerous instinct. My mind screamed at me to just move on, to not draw attention, to not get involved, but something, that persistent, irritating spark of conscience, caught me. Perhaps it was the shared terror, the brief, unspoken understanding between us in the waiting room. Perhaps it was just the exhaustion of being alone, always alone against the horrors of the world. Or perhaps it was the raw, undeniable fact that, in a way, I was responsible for her being on the ground. For the first time, I realized we were all just pieces on a board, moved by unseen hands, forced to destroy each other. And I had just done my part. I took a step forward, offering her my hand. She looked up at me, surprised, her sharp eyes searching mine, trying to decipher the intent. Then, slowly, she took it. Her grip was firm despite the pain. "Thanks," she muttered, standing shakily. Her gaze flickered to the turret, then to the unmoving body of the man who had died in my place. Her eyes were still calculating, but there was a flicker of something new there now. Shared burden, perhaps. I nodded, my voice rough. "We need to survive this." She glanced at the others, those who had yet to be called, then back at me, a long, assessing look. Then we watched each other's backs. I didn't know why, but I believed her. Maybe it was just the desperate hope of finding an ally in this hell. Or maybe, for once, my cynical gut was wrong. Maybe she meant it. My hand went to my wristwatch again, a silent, unconscious tick. Time was ticking, but it didn't matter what the hand said. All that mattered was the present moment, the next breath, the next arbitrary act of cruelty. The speakers crackled again. The next name was called. The game didn't stop. It never stops. I remained standing among the survivors, my body shaking, my mind reeling. The weight of what I'd just witnessed, what I'd just done, pressed down on me like a physical force, heavier than any regret I'd ever known. My breath was uneven, my vision blurred at the edges, the fluorescent lights seeming to pulse with a malevolent rhythm. My legs felt like they could give out at any moment, but I didn't move. I couldn't. My jacket felt like a second skin, clinging to the sweat that now chilled me to the bone. This was just the first game. A cold shiver crawled up my spine as the realization settled in. A bone-deep certainty that echoed the desolate landscapes I drifted through for so long. If this was only the beginning, then what horrors awaited us next? The rules were clear. Each game would push us further, break us piece by piece. The blood on my skin, still warm, was a grim reminder that survival was not about winning. It was about enduring. It was about making sure you're not the one left behind, the one whose body is dragged away, while the rest of us pretend not to hear their last breath. My stomach churned. My fingers twitched at my sides. I had to survive. I had to keep moving, because running from this wasn't an option. The only option was through. The speakers crackled to life again. The next announcement was coming. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as dust. The cycle of terror was about to begin again, and we were all still trapped inside it. And now, for the first time since stepping into this nightmare, I was not alone. Total character count, 9,987. The world exploded in a symphony of splintering wood and a sound like a wet sack of concrete hitting stone. Only the concrete was me. Agony, a white-hot spear, lanced through my spine as the desk above me buckled, its cheap particle board screaming in protest before giving way. My vision blurred, a kaleidoscope of fluorescent light and impossible shadow, as the immense calloused fist of the creature that was no longer Julia drove the collapsing furniture down onto my already paralyzed body. Air, or what little I had left in my lungs, roared out in a desperate, ragged gasp, tasting of fear and the acrid tang of ozone. Every cell in my body screamed for release, for the sweet oblivion of unconsciousness. But it wouldn't come. Not yet. This, I knew with a chilling certainty that pierced even the pain, was exactly how it ended. Again, this particular brand of hell, of course, hadn't started with a fist the size of a Thanksgiving turkey or the pulverizing weight of office furniture. It began, as these things always do, with a seemingly innocuous offer of a job, a fresh start in a place far enough from the last that the echoes of what I'd seen there might just fade into static, a chance to be just another ghost in the machine, clocking in and out, pretending the world wasn't a farm for something monstrous. The transfer papers to the new redacted restaurant group location had felt like a reprieve, a slip of paper promising anonymity. It was a smaller outpost, tucked away off a forgotten highway, its neon sign flickering like a dying pulse in the vast, empty expanse of nowhere. Perfect. No prying eyes, no familiar faces, just grease, the hum of industrial refrigerators, and the blessed quiet of the graveyard shift. That's all I ever asked for. A corner of the world where the screaming was internal, where the memories of things that defied physics and sanity could be kept locked behind a cynical grin in a worn leather jacket. My old analog wristwatch, the face scratched and familiar, felt heavy on my wrist as I stepped inside for my first night, a nervous tick already setting in, my thumb tracing the cold metal. It was 7:30 p.m., the beginning of another long, long night. The lobby was dimly lit, smelling of stale coffee and industrial-strength cleaner. A few members of the night crew were scattered about, slumped in booths, nursing lukewarm sodas. They looked as worn out as I felt, a collection of human debris floating on the currents of the night shift. Small talk, the meaningless kind that fills the void, drifted across the tiled floor for a fleeting, foolish moment. I almost allowed myself to relax. Almost. My gut, a loyal companion through years of unexplainable horrors, twitched. Nothing good ever started with almost normal. Then Jake, one of the team leads, detached himself from a shadowed corner and drifted towards me. He was a lanky kid, all sharp angles and restless energy, with eyes that held a peculiar, unsettling blankness. He handed me a single sheet of paper. "Manager," he said, his voice flat, "you'll want to read this, and keep it." My first instinct, born of years of dealing with corporate busywork and petty rules, was to smile thinly and dismiss it. "Rules?" I chuckled, taking the sheet. "Jake, I'm the manager. I make the rules. Or at least I'm supposed to know them all already. Don't tell me this is some hazing ritual for the new guy. I've seen worse." I crinkled the paper in my hand, ready to toss it into the overflowing bin next to the perpetually sticky counter. I was already forming a sarcastic retort in my head about company culture when Jake's voice, now devoid of any youthful energy, cut through the hum of the beverage dispenser. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." It wasn't a threat, not exactly. It was a statement, delivered with the chilling calm of a man who knew precisely what he was talking about. I froze, the paper still crumpled, and slowly turned. Jake was standing a few feet away, hands on his hips, his gaze sweeping over me with an unnerving intensity that made the hair on my arms prickle. It wasn't the look of a kid pranking a new boss. It was the appraisal of a seasoned survivor examining fresh meat. "I gave you that list for a reason," he continued, his eyes unwavering. "I recommend you read and follow it, to the letter." Then, as if the conversation had concluded, he turned and ambled casually into the kitchen, disappearing beyond the swinging door. The silence he left behind felt heavier than usual, laced with the metallic tang of something wrong. My hand trembled slightly as I slowly, carefully, uncrumpled the paper. The creases were sharp, like lines etched into old skin. My eyes scanned the words, bold and stark, "Rules of the night shift." My cynical facade, usually impenetrable, began to crack. This wasn't a joke. This was something else. A cold knot began to form in my stomach, familiar and unwelcome. It reminded me of the chilling instructions etched into the walls of that house in Sycamore Grove, the ones I'd barely glimpsed before the fire, before the memories went up in smoke. It was the same feeling I'd had when Ethan had smiled at me, promising hospitality, and I'd missed the hunger in his eyes, the kind that ate more than just food. I took a deep, shaky breath and read. "Rule 1. The lobby closes at 11 p.m. If you should see someone in the lobby past 11 p.m., you are to not say a word to the thing. Just walk to the kitchen, grab a burger, and hand it to the thing and walk away. It will not hurt you and will eventually disappear. If you so happen to break this rule, simply walk away to the office and stay there until the clock hits 12 a.m. My first thought, the thing? Great. Another chatty house. This one comes with a welcoming committee. My fingers tightened on the paper. This wasn't some corporate policy. This was something. It was the same kind of absurd, terrifying logic I'd encountered on those lonely, snow-choked mountain roads, dealing with things that shouldn't exist, things that whispered impossible truths. Rule 2, between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m., there will be a man who appears at the drive-through window, but you will never hear the beep in your headset go off. Just go to page 2 on your register and tell him he is all set and move him along to the next window. Do not make eye contact. If you should make eye contact, you are to close the window, wait in the office for 1 minute, and return to work. The thing will be gone. No beep? I scoffed internally. Convenient or terrifying? Probably terrifying. My eyes flicked to the drive-through window, a dark rectangle against the blackness outside. I'd seen enough impossible travelers in my time, enough faces that weren't quite right, to know that no eye contact was usually rule number 1 for staying alive. It brought back a shiver of the time Olivia, with her perfect porcelain smile, had invited me into her home, and I'd seen the subtle wrongness in the way her eyes lingered on the details of my face, like a predator assessing a meal. Rule 3. If you send an employee to take out the trash and he or she comes back through a different door than what he or she exited from, pick up one of the knives in the kitchen and stab them. It's not them. If you happen to break this rule, well, we here at Redacted Restaurant Group will no longer be responsible for your safety. This one hit me like a physical blow. Stab them. It's not them. My mind reeled. This wasn't just a threat, it was a command, a horrifying, unambiguous instruction to commit an act of violence. My reluctant conscience, that little flicker of decency I cursed for dragging me into every impossible mess, recoiled. But then, a cold, clinical part of my brain, the survivor's part, took over. Not responsible for your safety. That was the real threat, couched in corporate jargon. It echoed the chilling realization I'd had with Mitch, when the man in the walls had already taken his place, already been inside, lurking in the familiar contours of a friend. The idea that something could wear human skin, wear a familiar face, was a horror I knew all too well. Rule 4. If you get a call between 1 a.m. and 1:30 a.m., answer it and ask who it is. If they reply with Alex, then you are safe and may feel free to answer any of their questions they may have. If it is not, then you must hang up the phone and hide under your desk for 30 seconds and then continue your night. My gaze drifted to the landline phone on the counter, its innocuous plastic shell belying the potential terror it held. Alex. A name. A password. This was less a rule, more a ritual, and rituals, I'd learned, were how the things beyond our understanding exerted their will. Rule 5. At any point during your shift, if you enter the office and come back out to see the restaurant to not be the same as it was when you entered, return to the office, wait 30 seconds, and walk back out. If you break this rule, well, you may never be seen again. The final rule solidified the dread coiling in my gut. Reality distortion, environmental shifts. I'd stumbled into places that defied space and time before, places that had warped and twisted around me, echoing the infinite, hostile geometry I'd glimpsed in that chilling, fake heaven. This place wasn't just old, it was wrong. My hands, usually steady, trembled. This was no joke. This was a blueprint for survival, or rather, a twisted set of instructions for navigating a reality that had already begun to unravel. I folded the paper carefully, slid it into the breast pocket of my leather jacket. My initial amusement, my cynical dismissal, had evaporated, replaced by a cold dread that tasted like old pennies. "Good one, guys," I muttered, my voice thin, a forced chuckle dying in my throat. I know nobody likes the manager, but really? You couldn't come up with something different? It was a pathetic attempt to regain control, to pretend I wasn't shaking, that the rules hadn't just peeled back another layer of the universe's inherent cruelty. A deep, guttural rasp scraped across the silence. "What's so funny?" I snapped my head up, my heart hammering against my ribs. Standing at the counter, hunched slightly, was a man. No, not a man. A thing. He was draped in what looked like a tattered trench coat, and his face was a roadmap of violence. Scars crisscrossed every visible inch of skin, deep gouges and slick, puckered flesh, as if he'd been flayed and crudely stitched back together. His eyes, set deep in bruised hollows, glittered with an ancient, predatory intelligence. And he was watching me, not with curiosity, but with an unnerving stillness, like a python before it strikes. My internal monologue, usually a stream of sarcastic self-preservation, went momentarily blank. My hand instinctively went to my wristwatch. 11:10 p.m. Rule 1. The lobby closes at 11 p.m. If you should see someone in the lobby past 11 p.m., you are to not say a word to the thing. Just walk to the kitchen, grab a burger, and hand it to the thing and walk away. It will not hurt you and will eventually disappear. My mind raced. Was this a test? A brutal, chilling pop quiz on my ability to follow absurd, life or death instructions? Or was it real? After all I'd seen, the real and the unreal had long since blurred into one horrifying mess. The cold sweat trickled down my spine. My reluctant conscience, a nagging voice I often wished would just shut up, screamed at me to run, to bolt from my go-bag in the office, to disappear into the night and let the redacted restaurant group handle its own damn demons. But the survivor in me, the part that had learned to play the game, whispered, "Follow the rules. For now." I tore my gaze from the creature's unsettling eyes. It was difficult, like pulling teeth. Every instinct screamed at me to avert my gaze, but also to confirm it was still there. I forced my legs to move, each step heavy, deliberate. My heart was a frantic drum solo against my ribs. The kitchen was a haven of sorts, brightly lit, smelling of stale fries and hot oil. I grabbed a burger from the heat lamp. It felt greasy and insubstantial in my hand, a pathetic offering to whatever ancient hunger sat in my lobby. When I turned, the creature was still there, a silent sentinel of dread. Its eyes, impossibly old, watched my every move. I extended the burger, my hand steady despite the tremor in my soul. It reached out, its fingers long and gnarled, brushing mine for a fraction of a second. The contact was cold, dry, like touching ancient stone. It took the burger, a faint, almost imperceptible nod of its scarred head. Then, without a sound, it turned and shuffled out of sight, disappearing into the dimness of the restaurant lobby. I stood there, burgerless, hands still outstretched, for what felt like an eternity. The hum of the kitchen, the distant traffic on the highway, all of it faded. The air, thick with the residue of its presence, felt impossibly cold. My breath hitched. It was gone, just like the rule said, and it hadn't hurt me. Not physically, anyway, but the imprint of its ancient gaze, the chilling stillness, was now seared onto the inside of my eyelids. Great, Leo. Just great. Another thing to add to the nightmare gallery. The rest of the night settled into a fragile, unnerving normalcy. I kept expecting another test, another impossible encounter. I glanced at my wristwatch repeatedly, more as a nervous tick than to actually track time. 8:30 p.m. came and went, and I kept an anxious eye on the drive-through window, half expecting to see the silent man from Rule 2. Nothing. The lack of a new horror was almost more unsettling than the last, confirming my fatalistic worldview. The quiet moments were just interludes, breath-holding pauses before the next catastrophe. This place was a trap. Every fiber of my being screamed to pack my go-bag and vanish. But where? The world outside was just a larger, more thinly veiled version of this restaurant, with different monsters and different, equally impossible rules. 12:55 a.m. The trash bins in the back were overflowing, a testament to the night's modest, yet consistent business. "Hey, Julia," I called out, sticking my head out of the office. Julia, the other night shift employee, a young woman with a perpetually tired expression, looked up from wiping down the drink station. "Could you take out the trash for me?" She nodded, her shoulders slumping just a fraction more. "Sure, Leo." She gathered a few bins, pushing open the back door that led to the dumpster area. The door swung shut with a dull thud. I went back to the office, the flimsy partition offering little comfort, and sat down at the store computer, trying to reconcile the day's sales figures with the inventory. A pointless exercise, really, just busy work to keep the mind from unraveling. My thoughts drifted to Buster, my mangy, loyal dog. He was probably curled up on a borrowed blanket in the back of my truck, dreaming of chasing squirrels. He was my anchor, the one pure thing in this cursed existence. The thought of him, innocent and vulnerable, was both a comfort and a terrifying vulnerability. If anything happened to him because of my fucked up life, the shrill, insistent ring of the store phone shattered the quiet. My head snapped up. I glanced at my watch, my thumb tracing the cold metal of the crown. 1:05 a.m., Rule 4. If you get a call between 1 a.m. and 1:30 a.m., answer it and ask who it is. If they reply with Alex, then you are safe. If it is not, then you must hang up the phone and hide under your desk for 30 seconds. My hand reached for the receiver, already formulating the standard, "Thank you for calling Redacted Restaurant Group" spiel, when I saw her, Julia. She was walking back into the restaurant, but not through the back door she'd exited from. She was coming in through the front door, the one that led directly into the lobby. Her eyes, still tired, met mine. She offered a small, weary smile. "All done with the trash." Leo. My blood ran cold. Rule 3. If you send an employee to take out the trash and he or she comes back through a different door than what he or she exited from, pick up one of the knives in the kitchen and stab them. It's not them. The phone continued its piercing shriek, cutting through the sudden, horrifying silence. Rule 4 and Rule 3, crashing into each other like two derailed freight trains. What the hell was I supposed to do? My mind, usually quick to identify exit strategies, was a scrambled mess. Stab Julia, answer the phone, hide under the desk. My internal cynical voice was screaming, "This is why you don't get attached. Leo, this is why you stay on the goddamn road." But my reluctant conscience, the one that always got me into trouble, was screaming louder. Julia, she looked normal, tired, human, but the rule, Jake's chilling calm. It's not them. I lunged from my chair, my movement jerky, panicked. The phone shrieked on, an insistent siren of doom. My eyes fixed on Julia, who was now walking towards the counter, perhaps to tell me something else, perhaps to ask a question. My hand shot out, grabbing a heavy chef's knife from the magnetic strip on the kitchen wall. The cold steel felt impossibly real, impossibly heavy. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate bird trapped in a cage. It's not her. It's not her. It's not her. I repeated the mantra like a prayer, like a curse. Julia had stopped, her head cocked slightly, a faint frown creasing her brow. "Leo, are you okay?" Her voice, it sounded like Julia, but the rules, they had saved my life before. They were the only constant in this insane, shifting reality. My hand, guided by a primal, desperate instinct for survival, lifted the knife. "I'm sorry," I choked out, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It wasn't an apology to Julia. It was an apology to whatever remained of my humanity. I didn't hesitate. Not really. Not anymore. The blade plunged into her chest. Once, then again, and again. The sound was sickening, a wet, tearing rip, followed by a guttural gasp that was definitely not Julia. Her eyes, which had been confused just moments before, widened in a grotesque parody of shock, then dulled. Her body, unnaturally heavy, crumpled to the floor, leaving a widening dark stain on the clean tiles. My hands were slick with warmth, with something that wasn't quite blood, but felt exactly like it. My breath hitched. The phone. The goddamn phone. Rule 4. My eyes darted to the office. The phone was off the hook, its frantic ring replaced by a low, persistent static that seemed to fill the entire restaurant, vibrating in my teeth, resonating deep within my bones. The blood, a sudden, hot gush, erupted from my ears, pouring down my neck, a metallic torrent. My nose joined in, a sticky stream. Panic, cold and absolute, gripped me. I hadn't finished Rule 4. I hadn't asked who it was. I was screwed. Royally, irrevocably screwed. The static intensified, a deafening roar in my head, 1,000 frantic voices screaming in unison. It clawed at my eardrums, scraping at the fragile walls of my sanity. Then, a sound, heavy, slow, deliberate. Thump, thump, thump. Footsteps, huge, lumbering, getting closer. Each thud vibrated through the floor, through my very bones. My eyes, wide with terror, scanned the restaurant. The sounds were coming from the kitchen. My bloodied hands, still clutching the knife, trembled uncontrollably. The monster, the thing, the one from Rule 1, the one that was supposed to disappear, the one I'd given a burger to. Thump, thump, thump. Closer. I stumbled back, tripping over Julia's thing's lifeless form. The knife clattered uselessly on the floor. My go bag. It was in the office, just a few feet away. My only hope. I scrambled towards it, my legs like lead. The office door, sanctuary. The door was already swinging open. No, not swinging. Being pushed open, slowly, deliberately, and then I saw it. It filled the doorway. 11 feet of pure, unadulterated nightmare. Its skin was a mottled gray-green, like damp concrete, rippling with corded muscle. Its limbs were disproportionately long, ending in massive, clawed hands. But it was its head that truly broke something inside me. A grotesque parody of a human face, with no nose, only 2 gaping slits. Its mouth, a wide, lipless maw, was a jagged line of enormous, irregularly shaped teeth. And its eyes, they were vast, black abysses that seemed to suck the light out of the room. Twin voids of ancient, boundless hunger. It lowered its head, its black gaze locking onto mine. I was a rabbit caught in the headlights, paralyzed by a terror so profound it stole the air from my lungs. My body, already soaked in sweat and pseudo-blood, felt cold, clammy. I could smell it now, a foul, damp odor, like moldering earth and raw meat. The static in my ears reached a crescendo, a screeching cacophony that ripped through my brain. The monster let out a sound. It wasn't a scream, not exactly. It was a guttural, earth-shattering bellow that vibrated through the very floorboards, rattling the plates in the kitchen, sending tremors through the flimsy office walls. It was a sound of primal rage, of ancient hunger, of something utterly, terrifyingly alien. And it was directed at me. Then, with a speed that defied its massive bulk, it raised a hand, its fist clenching, fingers the size of my forearm. It brought it down, not on me, not directly, on the desk, the cheap, particle board desk, my only flimsy shield. The world exploded in a symphony of splintering wood and a sound like a wet sack of concrete hitting stone. Only the concrete was me. Agony, a white-hot spear, lanced through my spine as the desk above me buckled, its cheap particle board screaming in protest before giving way. My vision blurred, a kaleidoscope of fluorescent light and impossible shadow, as the immense, calloused fist of the creature that was no longer Julia drove the collapsing furniture down onto my already paralyzed body. Air, or what little I had left in my lungs, roared out in a desperate, ragged gasp, tasting of fear and the acrid tang of ozone. Every cell in my body screamed for release, for the sweet oblivion of unconsciousness. But it wouldn't come. Not yet. This, I knew with a chilling certainty that pierced even the pain, was exactly how it ended. Again. And then, blessed blackness. A sudden, complete cessation of pain, of sound, of fear. Nothing. I woke to the insistent, rhythmic tap, tap, tap of fingernails on glass. My head throbbed, a dull, aching drum. My body felt like a sack of broken bones, every muscle screaming in protest. The smell of disinfectant and stale coffee was overwhelming. I was lying on the cold, tiled floor of the office, curled in a fetal position, my back aching where the desk had presumably crushed me. My old leather jacket was twisted around me, a comforting, familiar weight. A man was standing over me, bald, impeccably dressed in a suit that looked far too expensive for this place. He had a strange, almost serene smile on his face, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He offered a hand, not to help me up, but holding something small and rectangular. "Ah," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone, utterly devoid of emotion. "I see you've met our nice monster who lives in the woods." "Nice?" I croaked, my throat raw. Every word was a struggle. "That thing tried to kill me." The memory of its black, hungry eyes, its monstrous form, was already burning itself into the permanent gallery of horrors in my mind, right alongside the pig creature from that last job, the one that had mirrored my face. The bald man merely inclined his head slightly, a gesture of polite dismissal. He held out the small rectangle. It was an envelope. I fumbled for it, my fingers clumsy. Inside were crisp, new $100 bills, a small fortune. "That," he said, his voice still unnervingly calm, "is for you. A little bonus for doing such a good job on your first night here. We value compliance above all else at Redacted Restaurant Group." I stared at the money, then up at him, my mind struggling to grasp the sheer, bewildering absurdity of it all. A bonus for surviving, for committing murder, for enduring a literal monster. I opened my mouth to speak, to demand answers, to scream, to ask what the hell this was. But he raised a dismissive hand, waving away my impending questions as if they were bothersome gnats. "No need for a response. There's plenty more where that came from. Should you wish to continue your journey with the Redacted Restaurant Group, good day." "Ani," he turned, the faint rustle of expensive fabric the only sound, and walked out of the office and disappearing as silently and abruptly as the lobby creature had, as if nothing had happened, as if the monster, Julia's murder, the blood, the crushing agony, as if none of it had been real, but it was real. Every terrifying, soul-shattering second of it. The lingering metallic tang in my mouth, the phantom pain in my back, the image of that black maw burned into my retinas. My fingers instinctively went to my breast pocket, the crumpled rules, still there. I decided to return. What else was there? Running was just changing the scenery. The horrors always found me. They were drawn to me, a beacon, a magnet. It was a curse I'd lived with since that night in Sycamore Grove, when my own past had turned into ash and smoke, and something unspeakable had left me as the sole survivor. The universe wasn't indifferent. It was actively hostile. A vast, grotesque farm where things like me were cultivated for unknown ends. There was no escape, not even in death. Not if heaven was just another monstrous, soul-sucking trap. I've been back here for a year now. The rules are still the same, though I've learned to anticipate them, to read the subtle shifts in the air, the faint wrongness in the silence. But it's getting worse. Each night is a little more twisted, a little more demanding. I still wear my leather jacket, still check my old wristwatch, still carry the weight of all the other horrors I've survived. The phantom hitchhiker, Ethan, Olivia, Mitch, the pig creature, the NDE. They all weave into the fabric of this ongoing nightmare, each a thread in the tapestry of my accumulated trauma. My go bag is always packed, always ready, and Buster, my loyal, oblivious Buster, waits for me in the truck. He's the only reason I keep coming back, the one pure thing I still have to protect. I think I've even discovered a new rule, one that wasn't on the paper. Something to do with the meat freezer and what happens if the temperature drops too low for too long. Lord help me. 999 characters. The cold wasn't just in the air. It was in my bones, a tendril of ice reaching from the flickering screen, burrowing into my skull. My breath hitched, caught in my throat, as the eyeless face on the monitor turned, not towards the camera, but towards me. A silent, ancient whisper echoing in the hollow space behind my eyes. "Why do you look away?" My hand shot out, a primal jolt of terror overriding every instinct. slamming the laptop shut with a violent snap. But the image, the feeling, was already burned into my retinas, a brand on my soul. The metallic tang of fear coated my tongue, thick and putrid. Outside the cramped, frigid utility room, the distant, muffled roar of a jet engine vibrated through the concrete, a mundane sound that suddenly felt like the howl of a beast. I could still feel those unseen eyes, a pressure behind my own, as if they'd reached through the digital veil and pressed their impossible gaze against my very consciousness. It began, as these things always do, with a seemingly innocuous job, a temporary gig, late nights, just enough cash to keep the wheels turning and my past buried. I was trying to outrun one nightmare, only to stumble headlong into another, hidden beneath the polished floors of what the world knew as a bustling international airport. Another gig, another city, another slice of my life gone to the grind. That's how it usually starts. This time, it was Las Vegas. Not the neon-drenched strip, but the gritty underbelly of McCarran International, where the glamour wore thin and the only light was the harsh glare of fluorescent tubes. I'd picked up a contract, a temporary logistics driver for an airport support company, moving supplies, equipment, anything that needed to get from one hangar to another, or from a loading dock to a restricted maintenance area. Mostly night shifts, Vance, the dispatcher had mumbled, not bothering to make eye contact. Less traffic, easier to move the heavy stuff. Sounded like paradise. Less traffic, less people, less chance of someone recognizing the weary lines etched around my eyes. Less chance of me having to explain why I was a man living out of a go bag, always looking over my shoulder. My worn leather jacket felt heavier than usual that first night, a familiar comfort and a constant reminder of how long I'd been running. The air inside the sprawling airport at 2 a.m. was recycled and stale, carrying faint hints of jet fuel and too many hurried goodbyes. The place was a mausoleum of human transit, hollowed out and echoing after the last flights had departed. I preferred it that way. Ghosts are quieter when there's no one around to scream. I'd done my usual scan, a habit born of too many close calls. Not a heroic sweep, just the twitch of a man who knows that danger doesn't always announce itself with a trumpet blast. Sometimes it's a flicker in peripheral vision, a shadow that clings too long, a silence that's just a little too deep. My old analog wristwatch, a nervous tick more than a time teller, felt cool against my thumb as I absently turned the crown. The job itself was mind-numbingly boring, which was exactly what I wanted. Drive a forklift, load crates, drop them off, repeat. The hum of the electric engine, the clatter of pallets, a monotonous symphony. But even in the mundane, the wrongness began to seep in, like dampness through old concrete. It started with the other drivers, or rather, the lack of them. My shift often overlapped with a skeleton crew, men who looked like they'd seen a lot of sand and sun, with eyes that were too sharp, too wary for mere forklift operators. They moved with a military precision that felt out of place in a civilian cargo bay, their backs too straight, their whispers too low. Plainclothes soldier, the original narrator had called them. I knew the type. Not the kind that followed orders from a general, but the kind who looked like they were guarding something far older, far nastier than conventional ordnance. They reminded me of the men I'd seen around that compound outside Wichita. The one with the empty and pristine house and the woman with the skin rug. Always the same look in their eyes, too knowing, too guarded, like they were hiding secrets that would make your skin crawl. Then there were the doors, hidden, unmarked metal doors, tucked away in obscure corners of the vast hangars, or behind mountains of crated equipment. They didn't have authorized personnel only signs. They had nothing, just blank, unyielding metal, often sealed with heavy-duty locks and occasionally guarded by one of those silent, hawk-eyed drivers who just happened to be loitering nearby. My internal monologue, the cynical, sarcastic voice that usually narrated my miseries, started asking questions. What's behind door number 3, Leo? Probably just another break room filled with stale coffee and bad decisions. Or maybe, just maybe, the answers to all your problems? Or the end of them? I knew the answer. It was always the end. I'd learned that the hard way, thinking I could trust a friendly face, only to find myself in a situation worse than I could have imagined. Like when I let Mitch into my home, not knowing what really lurked inside those walls. One night, the dispatch told me to take a load down to sub-level Bravo. My stomach tightened, a familiar premonition, a cold coil of dread that had become my constant companion since that night on the mountain pass, with the hitchhiker and the endless snow. Sub-level Bravo? I asked, my voice flat. Never heard of it. The dispatcher, a rail-thin man with a perpetually tired face, didn't look up from his monitor. New section, classified. Just take the forklift to the freight elevator at Hangar 7. They'll meet you there. Classified? That word always meant trouble. Usually it meant something was about to tear a hole in my already shredded peace of mind. But I was in too deep. Bills piling up. Buster needing his premium kibble. Reluctant conscience. You persistent bastard. My fatal flaw. Hangar 7 was a cavernous space, smelling of oil and cold steel. The freight elevator was massive, big enough to swallow my forklift whole. 2 of the plainclothes soldiers were waiting, silent, their faces impassive. One nodded curtly, gesturing to the elevator. I drove in, the metal grating beneath the tires protesting with a low groan. The doors slid shut, sealing us in. There were no buttons inside, only a small keycard reader. One of the soldiers swiped his card. The elevator lurched, then began its slow, deliberate descent. It wasn't just a floor down, it was deep. I felt the pressure build in my ears, the air growing colder, heavier. The hum of the elevator motor seemed to shift, becoming a lower, more resonant thrum, as if it were connected to something vast and powerful beneath us. We descended for what felt like an eternity, far longer than any standard basement level. The fluorescent light within the elevator flickered, casting eerie, shifting shadows that made the soldiers' faces look skeletal. I gripped the forklift's steering wheel, my knuckles white, my gaze fixed on the digital display above the door, watching the numbers tick down into negative double digits. This wasn't just a sub-level. This was something else entirely. This was the nexus. When the doors finally parted, the air that rushed in hit me like a physical blow, a biting chill mixed with that persistent, unsettling metallic tang I'd noticed on the surface. It was the smell of static, of ozone, of something wrong. The space we entered was immense, a network of tunnels carved into the earth, stretching further than my maglite beam could reach. The walls were a mix of rough-hewn rock and poured concrete, slick with condensation, gleaming under the dim, flickering amber lights. The ground was uneven, a patchwork of polished industrial flooring and raw, unfinished stone. The hum was omnipresent here, vibrating through the soles of my boots, a deep, resonant thrum that spoke of immense hidden machinery. It felt alive, this place like a dormant beast breathing. McCarran's shadowed underbelly isn't just an abstract thought, it's an engineered reality, the narrator had said. He wasn't wrong. I unloaded my crates onto a waiting pallet, my movements stiff, eyes darting. This was Hive 1. I gleaned from stray labels and whispered words. Administration, logistics, the mundane facade for the monstrous. But even here, there was a tension that stretched the air thin, a sense of being under scrutiny, even when no one was looking. There were more people down here than I expected, moving with quiet purpose, their faces grim, their eyes betraying a knowledge that no ordinary human should possess. They were like the lost souls from that strange farm I'd seen in my NDE, moving without hope, without true life in their eyes. My job was supposedly done, but the soldiers, those silent, watchful guardians, had other ideas. You're needed for an emergency transfer. Vance, Hive 4. My blood ran cold. Hive 4. The whispers I'd overheard from other drivers. The frantic, hushed tones. The quicker, terrified glances. Hive 4 was where nightmares are born. Hive 4 was where they kept things that bent reality. My mind flashed to the stories of the man in the walls, of the entity wearing Mitch's face. What kind of horrors were so contained, yet so powerful, that they needed their own designated hive? The journey to Hive 4 was a descent into an ever deeper labyrinth. The corridors narrowed, the air grew colder, and the hum intensified, vibrating through my chest until it felt like my very bones were rattling. The lighting became sparser, creating long, deep shadows that danced with every flicker. There were no friendly faces here, only more silent guards. Their weapons held a little tighter, their eyes scanning the dark with an intensity that screamed of constant, imminent danger. I could feel the presence of something heavy, ancient, and utterly alien, pressing in on me from behind the reinforced concrete and steel. It was the same crushing weight I'd felt near that abandoned house where the pig creature had hunted me, but multiplied 100-fold. This wasn't just a place, it was a cage for something beyond human comprehension. We stopped at a reinforced triple-locked door, unlike any other I'd seen. A keypad, a retinal scanner, and then a heavy, clanking mechanism that reminded me of a submarine hatch. "Wait here," one of the guards growled, his voice a low rumble. He vanished inside. I was alone in the dimly lit corridor, the omnipresent hum now a low throb in my skull. My hand went to my wristwatch, turning the crown aimlessly, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My go-bag felt a million miles away. This was it, wasn't it? This was where Leo Vance, cynical, world-weary survivor, finally ran out of road. My thoughts drifted to Buster, alone in that cheap motel room, wondering where I was. He deserved better than this. He deserved better than me. The door hissed open, and the guard reappeared, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "They need an override in the surveillance room. Tech's offline." He shoved a tablet into my hands. "Go, and don't touch anything else." My eyes widened. A surveillance room in Hive 4? Every fiber of my being screamed at me to refuse, to drop the tablet and run. But the guard's eyes were fixed on me, a desperate plea mixed with a threat. And that cursed, inconvenient conscience of mine. It kicked in, always does, always ruins everything. The surveillance room was small, freezing, and littered with discarded coffee cups. A bank of flickering monitors lined one wall, displaying grainy, distorted feeds of different sections of Hive 4. The air here was even thicker, charged with a palpable tension, like the silence before a lightning strike. The metallic tang was sharper, tinged with something else now, something acrid, like burnt hair and ozone. It was the smell of unnatural power, of things that shouldn't be. My fingers, numb with cold and fear, fumbled with the tablet. I found the override sequence, punched it in, and waited. As the systems came back online, the monitors flickered, then resolved into sharper images. My eyes were drawn to one in particular, labeled Cell Alpha. The camera angle was low, distorting the perspective, but the sight was clear enough to freeze my blood, solidify it into something crystalline and brittle in my veins. Two figures, not human. "Do not speak of the twins," a colleague once warned the original narrator. I understood now. Towering, pale as moonlight, their skin a waxy, translucent white that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Black, vine-like growths cascaded from their heads, writhing with a subtle, unnerving life of their own. They didn't walk, they drifted. Their movements were impossibly fluid, slow, deliberate. Yet they seemed to cover immense distances with no discernible effort, as if the laws of physics simply rearranged themselves around them. The terror wasn't just in their appearance, it was in their presence. The air around them shimmered, recoiling, as if reality itself was afraid. I saw a fleeting, grainy image of something on the floor near them. A discarded uniform, maybe, or something that used to be a person. And then, a sound that wasn't a sound, but a feeling. A deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the very core of my being, buzzing in my teeth, vibrating behind my eyeballs. It was their communication, a psychic imprint, not a spoken word. My gaze was locked on the screen, a morbid fascination warring with a desperate urge to look away. One of the twins, the one closer to the camera, shifted, slowly, its eyeless face, smooth and featureless as polished ivory, turned, not towards the lens, not towards the blank, unseeing optics. It turned towards me, directly towards me. I felt it. The impossible connection, a tendril of absolute cold consciousness reaching from the flickering pixels, burrowing into my skull, probing the raw, exposed nerves of my fear. It was an ancient, predatory intelligence, one that understood the very core of my being, the fragile, terrified thing I tried so hard to hide beneath layers of cynicism and self-deprecation. My breath hitched. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. A whisper, soft and lilting, echoed not in my ears but in the hollow space behind my eyes. "Why do you look away?" It wasn't a question. It was a command, a challenge. My hand, acting on instinct, slammed the laptop shut with a violent snap, the sound deafening in the sudden, echoing silence. The screen went black, but the image, the feeling, was already burned into my retinas, a brand on my soul. I stumbled back, hitting the metal console behind me, a jolt of pain barely registering through the icy grip of terror. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, threatening to burst through my chest. The metallic tang in the air was now overpowering, and I could taste it, acrid and nauseating, in the back of my throat. I stood there for an eternity, or perhaps only a few seconds, trembling, my eyes wide, staring at the blank screen, half expecting the eyeless face to reappear, to peer out at me from the darkness. My mind reeled. These weren't prisoners, they were keepers. The cruelest irony, our jailers. The thought was so vast, so horrifying, it threatened to fracture my already fragile sanity. This wasn't just a monster. This was something that broke the rules of reality, that saw through the world and saw me. It was the same soul-deep dread that had permeated my very being after that NDE. The realization that the universe wasn't just indifferent, it was actively hostile. A farm run by entities who viewed us as nothing more than livestock. The guard returned, his face a mask of impatience. "Done," he snapped. My voice was a croak. "Yeah, done." He didn't notice the tremor in my hand as I returned the tablet, or the way my eyes kept darting to the closed laptop, convinced that the twins' impossible gaze was still focused on me from within its dormant shell. He didn't notice the cold sweat plastering my shirt to my back, or the faint, ozone-like scent that now clung to my jacket. He just grunted and gestured for me to follow. The journey back up, through the labyrinthine corridors, felt like an escape from a nightmare that was still happening. Every shadow seemed to coalesce into the shape of a towering, eyeless entity. Every distant hum of machinery sounded like the psychic whisper of the twins. The thought that these things, these IDAs, were under McCarran, hidden in plain sight beneath one of the busiest airports in the world, was a reality too terrifying to hold. The conspiracy theories about Area 51 meant to distract suddenly made chilling sense. They were a smokescreen, a stage for a grand illusion, while the real horrors nested quietly under our feet. I finished my shift, working on autopilot, my body a puppet, my mind trapped in a loop of icy dread. I didn't say a word to anyone. The other drivers, the soldiers, they all looked normal. But now I saw them through a different lens. They were part of the mechanism, either complicit or oblivious, or simply too terrified to acknowledge the truth. They were just like the ordinary people I'd encountered on the road. People who looked normal but were hiding something monstrous beneath the surface, like Ethan, the charming cannibal. The world was a thin veil, and I seemed to be cursed to constantly tear it open. As I drove out of the airport compound, the first rays of dawn painting the sky in sickly shades of orange and purple, I glanced at McCarran International in my rearview mirror, a bustling hub of human activity, planes taking off and landing, lights blazing, a facade. Beneath it, the nexus, the hives, the unseen radiation, and the ancient, monstrous twins. The roar of the jets, the hum beneath the runway. They weren't just the sounds of commerce. They were the whispers of the unseen, the cries of a hidden world functioning parallel to our own. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, the worn leather of my jacket digging into my shoulders. This was a whole new layer of trauma, a fresh brand on my already scarred psyche. My past kept finding me, kept adding new horrors to the collection: the fire, the hitchhiker, Ethan, Olivia, Mitch, the pig creature, the farm in the afterlife, and now, the things that wore the guise of airport infrastructure. I was marked, forever drawn to the abyss. And the worst part, despite the terror, despite the constant gnawing fear, a tiny, hateful part of me knew I would keep looking. I would keep seeing, because that's who I was, the haunted everyman, the weary wanderer. My curse wasn't just that these things happened to me. It was that I couldn't look away. Not really, or not when the eyeless face demanded, "Why do you look away?" I had no answer for it. I never did. My only answer was to keep driving, to keep running, to keep trying to outrun the echoes of a truth too terrible to bear. For now, the wheels were still turning, and Buster was waiting. The scream hit me, sharp and sudden, ripping through the muggy summer night like a shard of glass. It wasn't a human scream, not really. It was too liquid, too impossibly far-reaching. A sound wrung from the throat of something that knew no end to its suffering, yet simultaneously, it seemed to be whispering right into my ear. I was on my knees, flashlight beam trembling, the dust-choked air heavy with the metallic tang of fear, and something else, something ancient and hungry. My hand instinctively went to the scarred leather of my jacket, then to the cold steel of my old wristwatch, tracing its face even as I knew no measure of time could make sense of this. The wails, a woman's, desperate and raw, shrieked from the attic above me, then instantly, without a breath, echoed from the damp cellar below. They mocked my futile search, ricocheting through the decaying maw of the house, a ghastly game of cat and mouse where the mouse was me, and the cat was a symphony of pure, unadulterated terror. My breath hitched, a dry, rasping sound in my own throat, drowned out by the chorus of despair. The house was alive, and it was screaming. It started, as these things always do, with a whisper of normalcy. A new town, Junction Falls, another temporary gig, night security at a derelict warehouse just outside city limits. The kind of place you take when you don't want to leave a paper trail, when the only company you crave is the hum of cheap fluorescent lights and the distant wail of a passing train. It was 2 weeks in, and I'd almost convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, this dusty corner of the world would be quiet, a place where the shadows stayed put and the past remained a locked door. Foolish. I know. It always is. The warehouse was a hulking, rectangular slab of corrugated steel, filled with the ghosts of forgotten inventory. My shift started at 9, ended at 5. Long, silent hours spent pacing the aisles, the beam of my mag light cutting through the gloom, highlighting cobweb-draped pallets and the occasional scurrying rat. Standard fare for a man like me, a weary wanderer who'd traded stability for anonymity. My uniform was my worn leather jacket, patched and scarred, a second skin that had seen more nightmares than most men lived in a lifetime. My only companion, Buster, a scruffy terrier mix whose loyalty was as unshakable as my own cynicism, was curled up in the passenger seat of my beat-up pickup, enjoying a rare night off duty. He'd earned it. I'd parked the truck far enough away that the faint glow of the city didn't quite reach, leaving it bathed in the soft, indifferent light of a near-full moon. The screaming house, as the locals called it, was about a quarter-mile from the warehouse, tucked away in what looked like an old, neglected neighborhood. From the reports I'd overheard from the few other guards I'd met, and the occasional frustrated police scanner squawk that crackled through the static of my cheap pocket radio, it was abandoned. Yet every now and then, a woman's screams would erupt from within its decaying walls. Shrill, desperate cries for help. I'd heard them myself a few times since I'd arrived, usually around midnight, cutting through the stillness like a jagged knife. Each time, a cold knot of dread would tighten in my stomach, a familiar chill that had nothing to do with the night air. My initial reaction, the rational one honed by years of running, was to ignore it. Let the cops handle it. They had, apparently, for years. They'd go in, search, find nothing, and come out looking like they'd seen a ghost, which, given the kind of places I seem to gravitate towards, probably wasn't far from the truth. Not my circus, not my monkeys, I'd tell myself, a cynical mantra I repeated with every new town, every new inexplicable horror. But beneath the layers of world weariness and self-preservation, there's always that flicker, that damned, cursed spark of responsibility that I've never been able to fully extinguish. No matter how many times it's dragged me into a fresh hell, it's my fatal flaw, a moral compass stuck pointing directly at the eye of the storm. Tonight, the screams were different, louder, more sustained, laced with a raw agony that burrowed deep under my skin. It wasn't just noise, it was an active plea, a plea that clawed at something long buried within me, a ghost of a memory from a place I couldn't quite recall, a fire I couldn't quite remember. My hand went to my wrist, my thumb idly tracing the cold metal of my watch. 12:17 a.m. Time seemed to stretch and thin around me. The thought of that woman, trapped, suffering, gnawed at me. Just check it out. Leo, a quick look. You don't have to be a hero, just verify. The internal monologue was a familiar, exasperating argument, one I almost always lost. I checked the perimeter of the warehouse one last time, a perfunctory sweep, then made my way back to the beat-up pickup. Buster lifted his head, his tail thumping a soft rhythm against the seat. "Stay here, boy," I murmured, rubbing behind his ears. "Daddy's got to go check on a banshee." He whined softly, sensing my unease, but settled back down. Good dog, smart enough to stay out of trouble, unlike his owner. I grabbed my mag light from the go bag, its heavy, ribbed casing a comforting weight in my palm. The bag itself, always packed, always ready, sat on the passenger seat beside Buster. Cash, a change of clothes, a few protein bars, a small first aid kit, the physical embodiment of my restless life, a constant reminder that I was always one horrifying incident away from hitting the road again. I zipped up my leather jacket, pulling it tighter around me, a useless armor against the dread that was already seeping into my bones. The short walk to the Shelby neighborhood felt like traversing a forgotten path. The moon, now high, cast long, distorted shadows of skeletal trees across cracked sidewalks. The air grew heavy, almost oppressive, the humid summer night suddenly cold and still. The cicadas, which had been a constant drone, fell silent. Even the distant highway hum seemed to vanish. A thick, unnatural quiet descended, broken only by the sporadic, chilling wails from the house. It loomed ahead, a dark, hulking silhouette against the bruised sky. A two-story Victorian, once grand, now a monument to decay, peeling paint, broken windows like vacant eyes, a porch that sagged like a broken jaw. The air around it hummed with an invisible tension, a palpable wrongness that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I smelled damp earth, rotten wood, and something metallic, like stale blood or old pennies. This wasn't just an abandoned building, it was a mausoleum of forgotten suffering, a throat choked with dust and despair. Great, I muttered to myself, my voice a ragged whisper in the oppressive silence. Another chatty house. This one comes with a welcoming committee. My cynical shield was already up, but it felt thin, brittle. My hand went to my wristwatch again, a nervous tick, grounding me. 12:35 a.m. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to ignore the pleas, to save myself. But the screams, they were still coming, now from a first-floor window, then a second, then a deep, guttural moan from what sounded like the very foundations of the house. I pushed through the rusted gate, the metal screeching in protest, a sound like fingernails on a blackboard. The overgrown yard swallowed me whole. Weeds taller than my knees, a tangled mess of neglect. A broken swing set stood like a gallows in the back. I approached the front door, my maglite beam sweeping across the warped wood, illuminating the faint outlines of long-vanished paint. The porch floorboards groaned beneath my weight, sending splinters of sound into the night. The front door was ajar, a sliver of inky blackness that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. My hand, steady despite the tremor in my gut, reached for the knob. It was cold, slimy with grime. The latch clicked, a sharp, deafening sound in the stillness. I nudged the door open just wide enough to slip through, my body tensing, every nerve screaming. The darkness inside was thicker, deeper than the night outside, an almost physical presence. It smelled of dust, decay, and something else, a faint, cloying sweetness, like dead flowers. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. "Is anyone here?" Only the echoes answered, a mocking chorus that seemed to reverberate from every corner of the vast, empty foyer. And then, the screams began again, right behind me, startling me so badly I spun around, flashlight beam cutting wildly through the gloom. Nothing, just the open door, framing a sliver of moonlight. My hand was already on the doorknob, ready to flee. This was it. This was my out. But then, from upstairs, a woman's voice, clearer this time, choked with terror. "Help me, please, God, help me!" It sounded so real, so impossibly close, like she was just behind the cracked banister. "Damn it," I cursed, my reluctant conscience winning the internal battle, as it always did. "All right, I'm coming." I moved cautiously, my boots crunching on what felt like broken glass and plaster. Each step was deliberate, painfully slow. The air grew colder, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones, not from temperature, but from a profound absence of life. My beam danced across water-stained wallpaper, peeling in long, curling strips, revealing ancient floral patterns beneath. Dust motes, thick as fog, danced in the light. "Where are you?" I called out again, aiming my light toward the staircase. The scream erupted from the master bedroom at the top of the stairs. A ragged gasp, immediately followed by a desperate sob. I started climbing, one hand on the banister, its surface slick with years of accumulated grime. The old wood groaned and creaked under my weight, each protest amplified in the silence. My eyes darted around, searching every shadow, every nook. The house was a trap, a gaping maw, and I was walking deeper into it. I reached the landing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The master bedroom door was ajar, a deeper pocket of darkness. I pushed it open slowly, maglite held high, beam sweeping the room. Empty, just a four-poster bed frame, stripped of mattress and bedding, looming like a skeletal sentinel in the center of the room. The air here was heavy, stagnant, as if the last gasp of breath had been drawn from this very spot decades ago. Then, from downstairs, from what sounded like the kitchen, the screams started again, louder, more frantic than ever. "He's here! Get away from me!" My head snapped toward the sound. My mind, already frayed, struggled to process. How could it move so fast? I spun, stumbling back down the stairs, cursing under my breath. "You've got to be kidding me!" The sounds ricocheted off the walls. A cruel game. It wasn't acoustics. I realized, a cold dread washing over me. No trick of architecture could make sound jump like this. This was deliberate. I reached the bottom of the stairs, heart hammering against my ribs, and ran toward the back of the house, towards where the kitchen should be. The layout felt wrong, disorienting. Corridors stretched, doorways seemed to shift, and the shadows danced with a malicious glee. The screams led me on, a horrifying siren song, pulling me deeper into the house's skeletal embrace. I found the kitchen, a cavernous, empty space, shelves stripped bare, a porcelain sink cracked and stained. The air here was even colder, smelling faintly of mold and something acrid, like burnt sugar. My light swept the room, revealing nothing but empty cabinets and the lingering sense of a meal long abandoned. No one, just emptiness. And then, from below, from the cellar, a low, guttural wail, followed by a series of frantic scrabbling sounds, like something desperate trying to break free. "No, let me out!" "Are you serious?" I gritted my teeth, frustration battling with pure terror. This wasn't a person. This was a tormentor. The house was playing with me, twisting my sanity, leading me on a macabre scavenger hunt. My mind flashed back to the brief, half-remembered snippets of police reports I'd overheard. Cops going in, getting disoriented, finding nothing, emerging psychologically damaged. I was walking straight into their footsteps, into the same hell. I located the cellar door, a heavy, rough-hewn slab of wood, tucked away behind what must have been a pantry. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of absolute blackness at the bottom. The smell of damp earth and decay intensified, thick and cloying. The wailing from below became a continuous, desperate hum, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to resonate in my very bones. I hesitated, my hand gripping the maglite so tightly my knuckles went white. Every fiber of my being screamed no. This was it. This was where I cut my losses. But the image of the police, baffled, defeated, haunted me. And that sound, that impossible, suffering sound. "Fine," I whispered, defeated, one last time. I pushed the door open, revealing a set of rickety wooden stairs disappearing into the abyss. Each step creaked under my weight, protesting my intrusion. The darkness down here was absolute, devouring my flashlight beam, making it feel like a weak candle flame. I could feel the presence now, a cold, heavy weight pressing down on me, the sensation of unseen eyes burning into my back. This wasn't just old house dust, it was the residue of something malevolent. The screams were everywhere now, no longer localized. They emanated from the walls, from the floor, from the ceiling, from the very air itself. A cacophony of agony, a chorus of despair that threatened to shatter my sanity. It was no longer a woman's voice. It was a chorus of voices, young and old, male and female, all crying out in unison, their pleas for help turning into accusations, then into mocking laughter. "Stop it!" I shouted, my voice cracking, the words swallowed by the overwhelming noise. I spun in a circle, my flashlight beam useless against the omnipresent horror. I was disoriented, my sense of direction gone. The air was thick, suffocating, as if the house itself was inhaling around me. The walls seemed to press in, the ceiling to lower, transforming the cellar into a lightless, soundless box. My old analog wristwatch felt like a dead weight on my wrist. Time having ceased to exist, I was adrift in a sea of pure, unadulterated terror. The sounds changed again, morphing, twisting. Now it wasn't just screams, it was whispers, ancient and sibilant, speaking directly into my mind, not my ears. They told me secrets I didn't want to know, showed me horrors I couldn't unsee. The house was a living entity, a being of suffering and malice, and it wasn't screaming for help, it was feeding on it. It was a predator, luring victims in, then absorbing their terror, their despair, adding their screams to its endless chorus. My knees buckled. I sank to the damp, earthen floor, my head in my hands, trying to block out the cacophony, trying to shut out the whispers that burrowed into my brain like parasitic worms. This wasn't a trapped woman. It was a trapped house, a structure imbued with something ancient and evil, a thing that had likely been built over something even worse. My repressed memories of Sycamore Grove flickered, the feeling of a similar, consuming presence, a fiery, unexplainable horror that erased everything in its path. This house felt like a kindred spirit, a place where reality had shredded itself, and the only currency was terror. The air grew icy cold, biting at my exposed skin. I could feel it, the presence. It was all around me, inside me, a silent, faceless entity that reveled in my fear. It was the house, and the house was it. It wanted me to suffer, to despair, to join its endless chorus. I was no longer a reluctant investigator. I was prey. My survival instincts, honed over a lifetime of running, finally kicked in, overriding the futile conscience. This wasn't a situation I could solve. This wasn't a person to help. This was something to escape. My breath rasped in my throat, a dry, metallic taste on my tongue. I pushed myself up, my legs trembling, my maglite beam still cutting a pathetic circle in the overwhelming darkness. I turned and stumbled, blindly heading back the way I thought I'd come. The screams followed. No, surrounded me, pushing me, pulling me, trying to disorient me further. Every step was a battle. The stairs seemed to vanish, then reappear, their steps slippery with phantom slime. The doors shifted. The rooms became indistinguishable. It felt like hours, days, trapped in this loop of madness. Time lost all meaning in that place, but something in me, some stubborn, defiant spark, refused to break. I forced myself to focus on the cold feel of the maglite in my hand, the rough texture of my leather jacket against my skin. Small, tangible anchors in a world gone insane. I pushed through the invisible barriers, through the mental assaults, through the sheer, suffocating weight of dread. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed, but I kept moving. Finally, a glimmer, a faint sliver of moonlight, a beacon in the suffocating black. The front door. I plunged through it, gasping, collapsing onto the overgrown grass of the front yard, sucking in great gulps of the relatively clean night air. It felt like I'd been underwater for an eternity. I lay there for a long moment, chest heaving, the screams still echoing in my ears, though now they were distant, receding, replaced by the thumping of my own frantic heart. My entire body trembled, racked with a cold sweat. I felt hollowed out, wrung dry. Another layer of my psyche scraped raw. My hand went to my wristwatch again, my fingers fumbling with the crown. It still showed 1:37 a.m. Barely an hour had passed since I'd entered that hell. It felt like a lifetime. I pushed myself up, my legs still shaky, and stumbled back towards the warehouse, towards the solace of my truck and the silent companionship of Buster. The moon seemed brighter now, almost mocking in its indifference. The cicadas had returned, their chorus a dull, comforting drone compared to the horror I just left. Back in the truck, Buster licked my face, his warm tongue a balm against my cold skin. I buried my face in his fur, clutching him close. He was real. This truck was real. The road, always waiting, was real. Junction Falls, just another stop on the endless, haunted road. Another notch in the grim tally of places where I'd stared into the abyss, and the abyss had stared back, showing me glimpses of its endless hunger. My cynicism felt deeper now, laced with a fresh bitterness. My conscience, the very thing that had dragged me into that house, felt like a lead weight, a burden I could never shed. I started the engine, the familiar rumble, a welcome sound. I wasn't staying, not here, not in a town where houses scream and time itself felt like a malleable horror. This wasn't just an unsolved case for some baffled police department. It was another wound in the soul of Leo Vance. Another layer of trauma to carry. Another ghost to add to the nameless, faceless ones that already haunted my waking hours and chased me through my nightmares. The road was calling, and I, the weary wanderer, had no choice but to answer. Character count: 9,487 characters.